Hey guys, tonight we were going way back, like mammoth hunting, fire discovering, fur wearing kind of back. We're exploring what sex looked like when privacy wasn't even a concept. Because when you're living in a cave with 10 other people and a saber-toothed cat might be lurking outside, pulling the bearskin over your head isn't just romantic, it's self-preservation. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not because of the content, we're keeping it PG-13ish, but because the historical discomfort alone is going to make you eternally grateful for drywall, door locks, and maybe even headphones. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's around 40,000 years ago. You're not reading by candlelight or scrolling through bedtime history videos. No, you're squatting beside a flickering fire inside a rocky cave that smells like smoke and sweat and wet dog. Well, not a dog exactly. More like a wolf that hasn't yet realised it's destined to become your pet several thousand years from now. You're part of a small clan, maybe 20, 25 people tops, and you've been travelling together for generations. Privacy? That's not even a word. The concept of personal space hasn't been invented yet. You sleep in a tight circle for warmth. You eat what you can catch. And when it comes to getting frisky, let's just say you'd better get comfortable with an audience. In this world, intimacy isn't hidden. It's incidental. The fire is the centre of life, so everything happens around it. Storytelling, cooking, tool-making, even childbirth. If you're going to hook up with your mate, you're doing it in the same general radius where people are skinning fish or fixing arrowheads. There's no bedroom, no separate tent. At best, maybe there's a shallow nook in the wall draped with animal hide. If you're lucky, you might wait until everyone else is asleep, though asleep in a Paleolithic world is a relative term. There are snores, groans, murmured dreams, and the occasional baby wail echoing off damp limestone. You glance across the cave. Your partner, strong shoulders, wind-burned face, dirt under them and their nails, nods slightly, you know that look. You're both covered in soot and dried blood from a reindeer kill earlier. But hey, if not now, when? You crawl under a mound of stinking pelts and try not to think about the lice. Your neighbour is an arm's length away, softly humming to their toddler. Across the fire, a grandmother is coughing through the night. But desire doesn't check the room for witnesses. It just taps you on the shoulder and says, ready or not. One real historical fact we know about this era. Early humans formed pair bonds, but sex wasn't strictly monogamous. Fossilised DNA shows that lineages blended often. It wasn't uncommon for multiple males to be fathers of children in a single band, which makes sense when you think about it. There wasn't really time for long-term jealousy when your main concern was not starving or getting eaten. Now here's a fringe fact you didn't expect. Archaeologists have found fertility figurines, curvy carvings with exaggerated breasts and hips, tucked into the walls of caves like spiritual Pinterest boards. Some believe these were totems of desire or fertility icons. Others argue they were just really committed art projects. But still, the intention feels intimate. Someone thousands of years ago carved a naked figure by firelight and kept it close. That's kind of sweet. Now, as for scholarly debates, there's a juicy one. Some anthropologists argue that prehistoric humans lived in largely egalitarian group-sharing societies, including sexually. Others think the nuclear family model may have been more common than we assume. Did everyone share everyone, or was that just occasional? Did couples bond for life, or did they swap partners when the moon changed? The truth? Probably all of the above, depending on the group and the season. As you snuggle into the hide with your partner, you hear someone stir and roll over nearby. No one says anything. No one has to. It's not polite or impolite, it just is. You feel their breath on your neck, their hand on your side, the warmth of them against the chill of the cave. In this moment, your connection is simple, raw, and utterly exposed to nature, to your clan, to the flickering shadows on the cave wall. But here's something wild to consider. Even in this gritty, rugged world, people cared about each other, about touch, about pleasure. Maybe it wasn't candle-lit baths and silk sheets, but that moment under the bearskin, that was intimacy. Honest, messy and prehistoric, but real. You drift off later to the sound of the wind howling outside the cave entrance, the embers of the fire dying down and the quiet murmurs of the people you share everything with. Food, danger, cold, and yes, even this. You wake up to the sound of footsteps, bare feet slapping against stone, someone rummaging through a clay jar, a baby crying for the 4th time this night. You're not in a cave anymore. Now it's 1st century Rome, and you're living in a 5-story insula, the Roman version of a tenement building. Think crumbling bricks, paper-thin wooden walls, and neighbours so close you can hear them sneeze. You're wedged into a 2-room apartment that's somehow supposed to fit you, your spouse or your mother-in-law, and a rotating cast of visiting cousins, and if you're wealthy enough to have slaves, congratulations, now you've got even more people watching you do everything, including the deed. There's no master bedroom in this place. You sleep on a straw mattress in the corner, while your mother-in-law snores in the other corner, her feet dangling off a creaky wooden bench. The chamber pot is right beside her, and yes, it's been used recently. You try not to inhale too deeply. Outside the shuttered window, vendors are already shouting in the street. A fishmonger is arguing with a beggar. Someone's leading a goat up the stairs. Again, it's loud, it's hot, and it smells like fish, garlic, and human ambition. Sex in this environment becomes something you have to choreograph with military precision. There's a sweet spot just after dusk before the baby wakes up when your cousin is out running errands, and your mother-in-law is drunk on watered-down wine. That's when you shoot your partner a look and quietly drag the curtain. Yes, a curtain, not a door, across your sleeping nook. And still someone always hears. The ancient Romans were a complicated bunch. On one hand, they had bathhouses, erotic murals, and an entire god dedicated to desire. On the other, they had social expectations tighter than a senator's toga. If you were a woman, your sexuality was heavily policed. If you were a man of status, you were expected to be in control but discreet. And gods forbid you show too much affection for your wife. That was considered suspiciously romantic. Here's your one clean-cut historical fact. The average Roman insula often housed 40 to 50 people in a single building, many of them living in 2-room apartments with no plumbing, no insulation, and zero privacy. The walls weren't soundproof, not even close. You could hear your neighbours coughing, crying, eating, praying, and yes, moaning. It's not that people didn't care, they just got used to pretending they didn't hear anything. Now for your fringe fact. There was a popular Roman charm, a small amulet shaped like a phallus, sometimes with wings. People wore these like good luck tokens hanging from their necks, their children's necks, even over doorways. The fascinum, as it was called, was believed to ward off the evil eye. But let's be honest, it was also a low-key way of saying, we know what's up. Back in your cramped little apartment, your spouse shifts under the threadbare linen sheet. You reach out, fingers brushing theirs. You're trying to be quiet, but everything makes a sound, the bed creaks, the straw rustles. Someone in the room above you drops a chamber pot. Again, still you find your rhythm. A brief moment of connection in the chaos. You try not to laugh when your cousin suddenly barges in, yelling something about missing olives. You freeze, he freezes. Your spouse dives under the blanket. It's fine, it's Rome. Now, here's where scholars can't quite agree. Some believe the ancient Romans were completely open about sex, that they didn't believe in hiding anything. After all, look at their graffiti, walls scrawled with crude jokes and explicit drawings. Others argue that public-facing openness was a mask, and real intimacy still happened in stolen private moments behind closed, or at least curtained, doors. Was their society truly liberal or just performative? It's up for debate. What's not up for debate is this. You don't have a choice. Whether you're making love, having an argument, or whispering a secret, someone is probably listening. A neighbour, a servant, a child pretending to sleep. You learn to be efficient, creative, and oh so quiet, or you just don't care anymore. And let's talk about those slaves. If you're from even a modestly well-off Roman household, you might have 1 or 2 living in your home. They're always around, helping cook, fetching water, cleaning up after dinner, and yes, sleeping in the same space. It was common for slaves to sleep near their masters, which means if you're planning something intimate, you're doing it knowing full well there's someone lying on the floor nearby, pretending to be asleep, or not pretending. That's its own uncomfortable reality, power dynamics tangled up with privacy or the lack thereof. You roll over, heart still racing a little. Your cousin is gone, thank Jupiter. Your spouse rests their head on your shoulder. You both know it wasn't exactly a cinematic moment, but in this city of marble statues and sweaty rooftops, stolen moments matter. intimacy doesn't always need silence. Sometimes it just needs eye contact and the ability to laugh when the chamber pot crashes. The room is dark again. The street outside buzzes with the life of the city that never seems to stop. Somewhere in the building, someone's singing off keys. Someone else is already arguing. And across the way, a neighbour coughs. 3 short bursts, then silence. You close your eyes. You can't forget that people are always around, but for now, in the quiet hum of nighttime Rome, you let yourself relax. Just for a moment. You're on your knees, stacking firewood beside the hearth, and trying not to choke on the damp, smoky air. Your hands are red and raw. It's the 13th century, and you live in a thatched roof cottage with a single room that somehow functions as kitchen, bedroom, birthing centre, and on special occasions, church. The walls are wattle and daub, the ceiling low enough that your taller cousin always ducks, and there are exactly 3 pieces of furniture, a bench, a table, and the bed. The bed, singular, which you, your spouse, and probably 2 of your kids all share. Your in-laws sleep near the fire, the chickens sleep in a box in the corner, and the goat, well, the goat goes wherever it wants. It's always either too cold or too warm, and there's never any silence. The kids cough, the wind howls, the neighbours next door are screaming about something again. You can hear it through the shared wall, which is basically just a thicker layer of mud and sticks. You pretend you're not listening even though everyone does. There are no secrets in your village. Not really. You're a peasant in feudal England, or maybe a rural town somewhere in France. Either way, your options are pretty much identical. You rise with the sun, break your back farming someone else's land, and return to your single-room shack in the hopes that dinner wasn't burned and that the baby hasn't rolled into the hearth again. The idea of private life is so foreign it would have sounded like sorcery. You're never alone, even when you are. But even here, even now, people still want each other. They still fall in love, or lust, or both, and eventually you and your partner are going to want to sneak in some time together. The problem is, where and how? Some nights, if everyone's asleep and the fire's burned down to an orange glow, you might gently tug at the threadbare blanket and pull your partner close. The kids are at your feet, one of them snoring, the other twitching in a nightmare. You shift carefully, trying not to wake them. Your mother-in-law coughs in her sleep, and the goat lets out a disapproving bleat. But still, you go for it. Quick, quiet, under the covers. There's no locking the door because there is no door. Just a heavy curtain made of woven flax, stiff with soot and dust. And here's your historical fact. In the medieval world, most peasant homes were one-room buildings. Shared sleeping spaces were the norm, and multiple generations often lived under the same roof. You didn't ask for privacy because the very idea of privacy didn't exist for people like you. The only folks who could afford that were nobles, and even then, only partially. Here's a delightful fringe detail. Medieval law in some areas actually required couples to have sex in order for a marriage to be considered valid. If you didn't consummate it, the church might call it off. And in a few extremely awkward cases, a witness, yes, a literal person, was called in to confirm it happened. Sometimes a priest, sometimes a servant. Occasionally a nosy relative. That's not privacy, that's group participation. But back to your little cottage. You're used to working hard for everything, including intimacy. You and your partner might sneak off into the woods during the day, under the excuse of foraging. You might linger in the barn, pressed between hay bales and the smell of cow dung, just for a few stolen minutes alone. In the winter, that's almost impossible. In the summer, it's better, but then the bugs join in. You've accepted that nothing in your life will ever be purely yours, and that even the most intimate moments come with background noise and a bit of livestock involvement. Now let's poke the scholarly debate of the day. How common was affection really among the medieval poor? Some argue that peasant marriages were more about survival than love, that you partnered up to manage a farm, raise kids, and not die of exposure. But others think we underestimate them. That yes, people were practical but also deeply emotional, that under the grime and labour couples still flirted, laughed, touched each other's faces in the dark. Just because they couldn't write love letters doesn't mean they didn't feel it. You pull the blanket up over your shoulders, shielding your face from the cold draft that always sneaks under the door curtain. Your partner's breathing slows. You listen for the rhythm of the cottage, the crackling coals, the sleepy rustling, the occasional shuffle of something with too many legs in the corner. You're exhausted, your bones ache. But in this tiny slice of the night, you feel human, real, not just a worker or a tenant or a parent, but a person with a body and a heart and a fleeting desire for something warm and close. It doesn't last long. It never does. Your youngest wakes up crying. The goat knocks over a bucket. Your in-law rolls over and mutters a prayer. You sigh, sit up and reach for your tunic. The night moves on. The village stirs. Life once again nudges you back into its rhythm. Still, as you crouch beside the fire, adding a few sticks to keep it from dying, you smile a little. Because even here, in a world of dirt floors and endless eyes, you manage to find a quiet moment of your own. Maybe not alone, but yours all the same. You're sweating under 3 layers of wool, your knees stiff from standing too long, and the candle in your hand flickers against the stone wall like it's about to give up. You're not a peasant anymore. Not exactly. Tonight, you're a servant in a grand medieval manor, somewhere in France or England, where the air always smells like roasted meat and mildew, and everything echoes too much. You serve nobility, which means you get to witness luxury up close, without ever touching it. You polish the goblets, scrub the floors, and walk past rooms where secrets whisper louder than prayers. And one of those secrets, the bizarre, romantic, ridiculously complicated invention of courtly love. This is no simple I love you, let's roll around in the hay kind of romance. No, this is a whole ritual. A noble knight falls in love with a lady he cannot have, because she's married to someone twice her age and owns a falcon. So instead of acting on it directly, he writes her poetry. He sighs dramatically. He jousts with her scarf tied around his arm like a lovesick middle schooler with a warhorse. You're the one delivering the poems, or lighting the lanterns outside the stables where they sneak glances, or pretending not to notice that the lady's dress is rumpled and the knight's boots are muddy when they come back from a devotional walk. Courtly love is supposed to be chaste, pure, platonic, but come on, you're the one who has to wash the sheets. Now let's be clear. This isn't love in the way peasants do it. This is performance. Sex and intimacy among the nobility had rules. So many rules it makes your head spin. It was political, symbolic, and often totally disconnected from marriage. In fact, the more forbidden the better. Affairs were fashionable, as long as no one got caught, and you knew which bishop to bribe if they did. Here's your one hard historical fact. Courtly love was a literary and social phenomenon that emerged around the 12th century in southern France and spread through the courts of Europe. It often involved a nobleman expressing love for a noblewoman through poetry, song, and elaborate codes of conduct. But historians agree it was rarely as innocent as it claimed to be. And now for the quirk, in some castles, noble couples, or non-couples, would actually arrange their trysts through the help of servants like you. There were secret staircases, coded knocks, and one particularly wild documented case of a servant using a trained dog to deliver love notes. That's right, a literal medieval flirt dog. You probably didn't get paid enough for that. You duck into a side hallway, your candle low now. Somewhere upstairs, a lute plays softly. Probably some bored squire trying to impress a milkmaid. Or someone else's wife. You pass the chapel, the cold stone altar gleaming in the moonlight. There's always this tension in noble households, between piety and passion. One moment you're helping the lord of the manor into his prayer robes. The next you're watching him sneak wine into the bedroom of a woman who's not his wife. Everyone acts holy by day, but after the third goblet of mead, things get loose. So where does privacy come into this? Funny you should ask. Because despite all this grandeur, noble homes were not actually that private. Bedrooms were large, open, and often shared with attendants. Curtains provided some separation, but not soundproofing. If a nobleman wanted a discreet affair, he had to either trust his servants, like you, or bribe them, or both. And sometimes even that wasn't enough. There's a famous debate among scholars about just how real courtly love was. Some argue it was entirely performative, a literary trope with no real-life counterpart. Others say it was a thin veil over an extremely active noble dating scene. Was it romantic restraint, or just fancy cheating in costume? No one can say for sure, but from where you stand, candle in hand, watching your lady tiptoe into the knight's chamber in the middle of the night, you'd bet your next meal that it wasn't all poetry. And what about the women in these stories? Here's the real twist. Noble women, despite being locked into marriages they rarely chose, wielded surprising power within the framework of courtly love. They set the terms. They granted favours. Sometimes they played the game better than the men did. Not because they were free, but because they'd learned how to bend the rules just enough to get what they wanted without getting caught. You're finally done with your rounds. The castle has gone quiet except for a pair of whispered voices behind the library door and the soft creak of old wood shifting under someone's weight. You don't ask questions, you just extinguish your candle and return to your little straw mat near the kitchen, the faint scent of rosemary and roast pork still lingering in the air. You lie down, pull a scratchy blanket over your shoulders, and think about the lives that unfold just above your station. So rich, so romantic, so absurdly complicated. And yet, at their core, not that different from your own. Everyone wants connection. Everyone wants to be seen. Even if they have to write 10 sonnets and climb a wall to get it. You're dripping wet, completely naked and surrounded by bodies. Some lounging in clouds of steam, some scrubbing themselves with cloths and sand, and some very clearly eyeing each other across the tiled floor. Welcome to the bathhouse. Whether you're in ancient Rome, medieval Islamic Spain, Edo period Japan, or 18th century Istanbul, it doesn't matter. The public bath is where you come to clean your body and, if you're bold enough, flirt with danger, or at least with someone else's spouse. The air is thick with moisture and smells of oil, sweat, and warm stone. You slide across slippery tiles, clutching your wooden bucket, trying not to make eye contact with that one person who's definitely watching too closely. There are rules here, customs, rituals. In Rome, you would have scrubbed down in the appetiterium, soaked in the caldarium, and finished with a brisk splash in the frigidarium. In Japan, it's soap first, soak later, and in the Ottoman world, the steam rises from the Göbek Taşı, a warm marble slab that's less spa day and more sweaty social hour. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Bathhouses weren't orgies, at least not officially. They were public institutions, community centres, really. Places for gossip, relaxation, maybe even business deals. But they also offered a strange, tantalising intimacy. A crowd of strangers, all in various stages of undress, soaked in kiss and heat and perfume and just enough anonymity to make your brain do stupid things. Let's start with a grounded historical fact. Roman bathhouses were open to both men and women, though not usually at the same time. Some cities had co-ed hours, others separated the sexes strictly. In Japan, mixed bathing was common until the late 19th century, when Western influences shamed it out of existence. And in the Islamic world, hammams were strictly gendered, but often hubs of female social life, places where women could let loose, laugh, and yes, occasionally arrange a little something extra. But here's a quirk that doesn't get enough press. Some Roman bathhouses had separate entrances for prostitutes, not just tolerated, invited. In fact, in Pompeii, graffiti on bathhouse walls includes everything from price lists to full-blown reviews of favourite working girls. So when you soaked in the hot pool, you weren't just relaxing your muscles, you were browsing. Of course, not all bathhouses were so flexible. In Edo period Japan, for example, the sento was a place for community hygiene, not flirtation. Except sometimes it was both. Teenage apprentices sneaking glances, older women chatting about whose husband needed more rice but not more sage, while knowing full well he'd been lingering too long in the men's section. Everything was unsaid but not unnoticed. Now comes the scholarly squabble. How erotic were bathhouses really? Some argue the sexual atmosphere is overblown, that it's just modern minds reading too much into communal nudity. Others insist that historically, these spaces were well known for quiet hookups and taboo relationships. Did people come here just to clean, or to connect in ways they couldn't anywhere else? Back in your current moment, you slide onto a warm bench, breathing in eucalyptus oil and someone else's body odour. You're trying to keep your eyes respectfully averted, but it's hard when everyone's skin is glistening, draped only in towels, or not at all. A man across from you pours water over his chest, glances your way, then looks away with a faint smirk. You feel both embarrassed and intrigued. That's the magic of it. Plausible deniability. Everything's accidental. A brush of fingers, a shared cup of water, a longer than necessary gaze. And then there are the attendants. In ancient Rome, you might have had a slave scrub your back. In an Ottoman hammam, a young telak would knead your muscles, working out knots with an intimacy that sometimes blurred lines. In some cultures, that was just service. In others, less so. The point is, when everyone's half naked and glistening and no one's in a rush, boundaries get blurry, you reach for your towel and wrap it around your hips, rising slowly as the heat starts to make you woozy. Around you, people are laughing, whispering, pouring ladles of hot water over their shoulders. It's a strange kind of public privacy. You're all exposed, yet everyone pretends not to see. Or they see too much and pretend it doesn't matter. You pass a corridor with a flickering lantern and catch a glimpse of two silhouettes, close together, one pressed gently against the wall. No one reacts. You just keep walking. Because here's the thing, when you live in a society with no bedrooms of your own, no locked doors, no midnight drives to make out under a starry sky, you find connection wherever you can, even in the echo of steam, even in the shift of a towel, even in a stolen look between strangers sharing a bath in the middle of a chaotic world. You leave the building cleaner than you've been in weeks, but you also leave with something else, something wordless, a quiet thrill that hums under your skin as you step into the night. The stars are sharp above you, the street is quiet, and though you're technically alone, the memory of warm water and warm glances lingers, soft as steam curling through the cracks in your composure. You're kneeling on a stone floor, head bowed, hands clasped, and trying not to think about your own body. It's the 11th century, and you're a good Christian, or at least trying to be. The church has sunk its hooks deep into every part of your life, especially the parts you secretly wish it would stay out of. You're not alone in this chapel. Everyone else in the village is here too, murmuring prayers, crossing themselves, whispering apologies to God for every impure thought they've ever had, including you, especially you. You see, in this time and place, sex isn't just private, it's dangerous, spiritually dangerous. Every desire is a test, every touch a potential sin. The church isn't just in charge of your Sunday plans, it controls your marriage, your fertility, even the days you're allowed to sleep with your spouse. Want a little passion during Lent? That's a sin. Feeling frisky on a saint's feast day? Also a sin. Advent? Forget it. You're basically looking at a calendar full of red X's and guilt. This is the age of penitentials, those handy little books priests use to assign your spiritual punishment. Thought a lustful thought. That's 3 Hail Marys and a week of bread and water. Had sex standing up. 7 years of penance. Did it on a Sunday? Might as well start digging your own grave. But here's your historical fact. The medieval church created incredibly detailed lists of sexual sins and corresponding punishments. Some of these were bizarrely specific, like marital relations during daylight hours, 2 years of penance, or using the wrong position, 8 years plus alms to the poor. These weren't obscure doctrines. They were the rule books for everyday people trying to love and live under the constant surveillance of both God and the local priest. And you do try, you really do. You marry the person your family approves of, you follow the feast days, you confess everything. But at night, when the candles are out and the children are asleep in their corner of the straw mattress, you reach across the dark and find your spouse's hand. And for a moment, you forget about sin. The bed creaks, the wind moans through the wooden slats of your home, and somewhere deep in your chest, shame and desire are doing an awkward little waltz together. You whisper a prayer, not to stop the feeling, but that no one finds out. And here's the weird fringe detail. Some clergy actually offered marital sex manuals, guides on how to avoid sin while consummating your marriage. One surviving example, written by a monk with way too much free time, suggests couples should abstain from eye contact, avoid speaking, and neither laugh nor enjoy themselves excessively. Translation: just lie there and think of heaven. Romantic, right? But not everyone buys into this fear. Scholars are still divided. Was the average medieval peasant truly tormented by guilt every time they got naked? Or was all this just the official line, like a medieval version of terms and conditions no one actually read? Some researchers argue that people mostly ignored the strictest rules unless a priest was watching. Others insist the fear of damnation ran deep, especially in smaller, more tightly controlled communities. The answer? Probably somewhere in between. In your case, you try to walk the line. You love your spouse. You want them. You believe God understands, even if the priest would faint if he heard half the things you've imagined during harvest season. So you compromise. You keep things quiet, you don't experiment, you pray afterward. It's not exactly erotic freedom, but it's survival. Sometimes, though, you slip. A lingering kiss, a laugh that turns into something more, a hand slipping under the blanket when it shouldn't. And afterward, the shame clings to you like cold mist. Not because you regret it, but because you've been told to. The next morning you go to confession. Kneeling on hard stone, the priest behind the wooden screen. You murmur your sins, too much pleasure, too little restraint. He sighs, tells you to fast, to pray, to remember that sex is only for reproduction. He reminds you that even within marriage, desire is suspect. You nod, say yes, oh Father, and leave with a heart that feels like it's been wrung out and hung up to dry. You look around at the other villagers. Everyone's got that same tired, slightly guilty look. Everyone's pretending they don't notice when someone else looks at someone a second too long. You start to understand that you're all playing the same game. Pretend, confess, repeat. And yet, life still pulses beneath it all. Babies are born, lovers sneak glances during Mass. And sometimes, despite everything, you find joy in your spouse's arms. Quietly, carefully, in between feast days. You settle into bed that night, listening to the rain on the thatch above. Your spouse breathes beside you, warm and steady. You pull the blanket up to your chin and try not to think about the sin tally you might have added to tonight. You try not to feel guilty for the happiness, but even here in a world ruled by saints and sermons, desire still sneaks through. It always does. You're clutching a horn of ale, your legs numb from cold, and the fire pit at the centre of the longhouse is spitting smoke into your face. Welcome to the Viking Age. You're in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Pick your icy poison. It's the 9th century, and you live in a communal wooden hall with 30 other people, most of whom are family, but not all of whom are particularly polite. There's a lot of noise, someone's sharpening an axe, someone else is passing gas and blaming the goat. And somewhere across the room, 2 people are arguing in whispers about who gets to sleep next to the fire tonight. This is home. The longhouse. A single elongated rectangle of timber and turf where the humans sleep on raised wooden benches lining the walls, and the animals sleep in the centre aisle or underfoot. It smells like old fish, wet wool, pine smoke, and fermented regret. There are no rooms, no partitions, and certainly no doors, just a heavy hide flap at the entrance and some animal skins strung between beds if you're feeling fancy. So when you and your partner want to be intimate, you're going to have to get creative. Here's your historical fact for the night. Viking longhouses were communal spaces where entire families, and sometimes multiple families, lived together. Privacy, as we understand it today, didn't exist. Yet marriage was important in Norse culture, both socially and economically. And sex? It was expected, celebrated even, just not hidden. You roll over on your fur-covered bench, squinting across the hall. Someone's making out in the shadows. Nothing graphic, but definitely enthusiastic. No one reacts. It's considered bad manners to stare. But no one's pretending it isn't happening either. That's just life. You don't whisper about desire here. You don't blush when someone's shirt falls off. These are people who regularly wrestle bears and drink blood out of ceremonial bowls. Sensitivity isn't exactly the cultural cornerstone, but don't confuse bluntness for emotional openness. This is still a world bound by status, family ties, and gender expectations. Viking society could be harsh, especially for women and thralls, enslaved people with no autonomy. If you're a free woman, you have more say in your marriage than your European cousins do. You can divorce your husband if he's cruel or lazy. You can keep property. You can even challenge your in-laws to a legal duel if they try to interfere. But that doesn't mean you get to choose your sleeping arrangements every night. And here's the quirky little gem. Viking love poems? Yes, these warrior shipbuilders also composed incredibly heartfelt verses about longing and beauty. Some of them are shockingly tender, while others are, let's just say, very direct. One poem literally boasts about the poet's ability to seduce multiple women, including one who was already in bed with another man. Bragging? Sure, but with metre and rhyme, so it's basically art. Scholars argue endlessly about how open Viking society truly was about skintol and sex. Some claim they were pragmatic and shameless, viewing physical intimacy as natural and unremarkable. Others think we're projecting our modern fantasies onto a culture that, while less repressed than Christian Europe, still had its own rigid moral structures. Did they really have wild communal love lives? Or was it just a lack of walls giving us that impression? Back to your bench. It's your bed in the most generous sense of the word. A few itchy pelts, a sagging wool-stuffed pillow, and a wooden beam overhead that you hit your head on every morning. Your partner lies beside you, breathing softly. You reach for their hand under the fur. The warmth of their fingers cuts through the chill in the room. Around you, the longhouse murmurs. Someone snores. A dog barks in its sleep. The fire pops. You're never alone here, not really, but you've learned to carve out moments of privacy in plain sight. Sometimes that means slipping outside into the freezing night, finding a shadowed corner behind the woodpile, and making do under the northern lights. Other times it just means pulling a pelt over your heads and keeping still until the kid 2 benches down finally stops humming to himself. If you're lucky, the others pretend not to notice, or they laugh, or they throw a boot in your direction and say something crude. It's not shameful. It's just communal. You think back to the stories of the old woman told by the fire earlier. Tales of gods and giants, of Loki seducing horses, and Freyja weeping golden tears over her lovers. Even the myths here are soaked in desire. Lust isn't something you confess to a priest. It's something you sing about around a fire. After a few too many swigs of mead. There's freedom in that. Crude, messy, hilarious freedom. You don't have to pretend that you're chaste or pure. You just have to make it work in a room full of cousins and a goat with judgmental eyes. As you settle into the furs, your partner shifts closer. You exchange a look, brief, knowing, amused. You've done this before, you'll do it again. There's no locked door, no soundproof walls, no safe little bedroom. Just a flickering fire, some muttered prayers to Thor, and a blanket of wool between you and the rest of the world. It's not ideal, it's not romantic, but it's real. And that might be the closest thing to privacy you'll get in this long, smoky hall. You're lying flat on your back, staring at a cracked ceiling, while someone in the next bed of Via coughs like they're about to expire. Welcome to a 17th century London boarding house where the walls are thin, the mattresses are shared, and the concept of alone time is less of a luxury and more of a pipe dream. You've rented a spot in a room with 6 other people, none of whom you're related to, and at least one of whom smells like spoiled ale and desperation. This isn't a hotel. It's survival, by the night, by the coin, by the square foot. Your bed is more of a shared slab. Rope-slung frame, hay-stuffed ticking mattress, one grimy blanket that hasn't been washed since the last plague scare. There are no bed curtains, no partitions, just you, your bunkmate, some stranger named Reginald who hums in his sleep, and the unrelenting aroma of unwashed feet and boiled cabbage wafting up from the floor below. Still, even in this bleak arrangement, people somehow find ways to connect. You've watched it happen. A whispered flirtation over a chipped teacup in the communal kitchen. A pair of glances exchanged between 2 boarders who pretend that they don't know each other in the morning. A stolen moment behind a wash line, because when you live this close to others, every touch, every brief flash of privacy is something you learn to crave like food. Here's your historical fact. Boarding houses in early modern Europe were incredibly common, especially in growing cities like London, Paris and Amsterdam. For the working poor and newly arrived migrants, these multi-tenant houses offered a place to sleep, but not much else. Entire families might rent a single room. Individuals might split a bed with strangers, arranged by the landlord. Known as singlemen's lodging houses, these places were often crowded, loud, and teetering on the edge of collapse. So yes, people had sex in them. Not just couples. Anyone who could have managed to find a quietish moment, and maybe a blanket to cover up the activity from the eyes 2 feet away. And here's your fringe fact, zumst. In 17th century London, candle-to-bed inns were known for allowing temporary couples to rent rooms just long enough for a quick roll in the hay. Literally. That's where the phrase came from. The room was yours for the life of a candle. When the wax ran out, so did you. Back in your own room, it's nearing midnight. The landlady has doused the main hallway lantern, and the floorboards have mostly stopped creaking. You hear someone below arguing about the price of tobacco. Someone else groans in their sleep. You've been lying beside your partner, pretending to sleep, waiting for the moment when the rest of the room tips into that murky in-between state, where people are either asleep or just too exhausted to care. You touch their hand under the blanket. It's a cautious gesture, more hopeful than hungry. They squeeze your fingers back. You shift, carefully, praying that Reginald continues humming and doesn't decide to roll over. The creak of the bed is unavoidable, but you move slowly, quietly. You and your partner are pressed together now, breath close, heart pounding from a mix of excitement and pure logistical stress. Every noise in the room becomes magnified. Every shift of hay, every cough, every whisper. And this is where the debate comes in. Did people in early modern cities feel shame for this lack of privacy? Or was it just the accepted cost of urban living? Some scholars argue that intimacy became even more urgent in these crowded conditions, something defiant, even beautiful in the midst of poverty. Others suggest that the constant surveillance dulled desire, turning physical love into a mechanical act, stripped of spontaneity and meaning. But if you ask the people living it, they'd probably say we don't have the luxury to think about it that hard. We just make do, because what's the alternative? Wait until you can afford your own room? That could take years, if it ever happens. Wait until marriage? That's assuming your partner doesn't get poached by someone with a better mattress. So instead, you steal this moment. It's not ideal, it's not glamorous. It's a quiet rhythm under a shared blanket, next to a stranger with a snoring problem, and across the room from a woman who sleep talks about dead chickens. But in your mind, you're somewhere else. Somewhere warm and private with a door that shuts and no one arguing downstairs about someone else's missing boots. For now, it's just the warmth of your partner's skin, the way they mouth your name like a secret, and the quiet connection you're building under all this discomfort. Afterward, you lie still. You don't speak. You both know the rules, pretend nothing happened, breathe slow, and don't make eye contact in the morning. You pull the blanket up and hope it masks more than just your bare shoulder. Reginald mumbles something about pigeons in the attic, and your partner stifles a laugh. And yet, despite the absurdity, there's something intimate here. Something real. Not because you had candles or silk sheets, but because you made something tender inside a place that was designed to strip tenderness away. It's easy to feel close to someone when you're in a castle. It's harder when you're pressed between a wall and a man named Reginald, who keeps kicking in his sleep. That's what makes it count. Eventually the night settles. Outside a bell tolls the hour. The city groans in its sleep. And you're curled up beside someone who made the night a little less lonely. A little less cold even here, in the worst of it. You're tugging at your collar, cheeks flushed, and trying desperately not to think about what you just saw in the barn. Welcome to Puritan New England and mid-17th century, where everyone's watching, especially God, and even your thoughts are fair game for the public judgment. You're dressed in itchy wool, your hair is probably covered, and your emotions are a shameful inconvenience. Lust? That's the devil whispering in your ear. Touch? A gateway to eternal damnation. Marriage? The only sanctioned outlet, and even then, it better be done modestly, quietly, and preferably with your nightshirt still on. You're part of a tiny settlement clinging to the edge of an unforgiving wilderness. There are maybe 40 families here, scattered between wooden cabins and fire-prone meeting houses. Your life is hard. Long days in the fields, endless sermons, and absolutely no privacy. You share a single room with your entire family. Your bed is a straw mattress stuffed into a wooden frame tucked into the far corner of a drafty cabin. The children sleep in trundle beds or curled up on the floor in front of the hearth. You can hear your father snore, your mother mutter prayers in her sleep. Someone's always coughing and the firewood smells like mildew. And you're supposed to be thinking about the Psalms, but the problem is you're human. Here's your historical fact. The Puritans were not actually as sex-negative as pop culture makes them out to be. Within marriage, sex was not only tolerated, it was encouraged. There are documented cases of women filing for divorce because their husbands were sexually neglectful. The idea was that marital intimacy kept people from straying into temptation. That said, sex was still tied deeply to morality, modesty, and religious obligation. No passion allowed, no experimentation, just appropriate reproduction done in the name of God, but hopefully in the dark. You sneak glances at your partner as they hang laundry outside. The wind catches their sleeve. For a second, you see their wrist, bare against the sunlight, and it knocks the breath out of you. That's the level we're working with here. Wrists are risque. Ankle glimpses are borderline scandalous. Full-blown eye contact during a community supper? That's the stuff of fantasy, and you try to look away, you really do, but your mind wanders. You remember the time your partner touched your hand too long during the wheat harvest. The warmth of their skin, the way they looked at you, not with lust necessarily, but with a shared sense of knowing. That moment has played on repeat in your mind ever since, even though you've prayed a dozen times for forgiveness. And then there's the barn incident. You were fetching hay. You weren't snooping, but you saw something, two people pressing together in the chateaus, lips locked, clothing slightly askew, not married, not discreet, and not aware you were standing right there. You fled, of course, and you've been trying not to think about it ever since, but it lingers, because if they can be that bold, can't you at least feel something in your own marriage? Later that night, you lie beside your spouse in bed. The fire is low, the children are asleep, the wind taps against the window pane. You reach for them, slowly, gently, no words, just the warmth of their body under the quilt. They turn toward you. It's been days, weeks maybe. You've both been exhausted, but now, with the house finally quiet, you feel that pull again, that dangerous, thrilling, forbidden whisper of want. Here's the fringe fact. Puritan communities had church-sanctioned viewings to confirm consummation, in some cases. Yes, literally. Neighbours or elders might check the bed linens for blood or listen outside a door to ensure the act had occurred. Nothing says romance like your pastor hovering outside with an ear to the wood. The scholarly debate rages on. Were Puritans truly as repressed as we believe, or were they just methodically rechanneling human instincts into a framework they could control? Some argue that sermons railing against desire only reveal how common it was. Others say the intense focus on policing sex actually created more obsession than abstinence. One theory suggests that guilt and repression only made people more imaginative, because you can ban a kiss, but you can't ban a fantasy. Back in your bed, you and your spouse are trying not to move too much. The wooden floor creaks under the smallest shift. Your child coughs in their sleep. You hold your breath. You continue anyway, quiet as possible, your heartbeat pounding louder than any noise you're making. There's no candle, no pillow talk, no time to be leisurely. Just a brief moment of connection, hidden in plain sight, with sin coiled like smoke in the rafters above. Afterward, you lie still, eyes on the ceiling, waiting for the guilt to arrive like it always does. But tonight, it doesn't. Not fully, because in this moment, you don't feel wicked. You feel alive, real. Less like a servant of the scriptures and more like a person with blood in their veins, a person who loves, who desires, who risks everything just to feel close. Morning comes fast. The rooster crows, the baby cries. You're up before sunrise, stoking the hearth, acting as if nothing happened. But as you stir the pot of porridge, your spouse brushes your shoulder lightly on their way past. A second too long, not enough to draw attention, just enough to say, "I remember." And in this world of wooden pews and unending penance, that small act feels more rebellious than anything else, because you're not just surviving, you're finding joy even where you're told it shouldn't exist. You're standing awkwardly near a carved bedpost, holding a goblet of watered-down wine while pretending you're not listening to your employer argue with his wife about whose cousin should witness their bedtime. You're in Versailles, or maybe Fontainebleau, one of those echoing French palaces where the ceilings are 20 feet high and the drama is somehow even higher. Welcome to the world of 17th century aristocracy, where even your sex life has an audience and privacy is for peasants. You are a servant, not a lowly chambermaid, not quite nobility, somewhere in the soft candlelit blur between. You've got decent clothes, a long list of chores, and an even longer list of things you're supposed to ignore, like the moaning from behind silk curtains, or the Baroness disappearing into the stables after midnight, or your lord being very affectionate with his favourite violinist. In this world, intimacy isn't hidden, it's staged, like theatre, ritualised, scheduled, commented on. The French royal court even had a tradition called the lever, where nobles would literally watch the king wake up, get dressed, and yes, be tucked into bed at night. Now imagine if that included your honeymoon, because sometimes it did. Here's your grounded historical fact. In many aristocratic households, marriages, especially high-profile ones, were publicly consummated. Not full-on sex before an audience, though there are whispered rumours of that too, but enough ceremony to confirm the deed. Sheets were inspected, witnesses lingered just outside the door, servants helped undress the couple, handed over scented oils, maybe even lit a few symbolic candles. The whole thing felt less like romance and more like a production. Curtain up, lights dim, applause not required but deeply implied, and yet somehow people still managed to fall in love, or at least in lust. That's where the real fun began. You see, when everyone's watching the official bed, the unofficial ones become far more interesting. Affairs ran rampant through the halls of these gilded estates. Courtiers slipped into each other's chambers under the cover of too many wigs and too much perfume. Messages were hidden in bouquets, fans flicked with coded gestures, and liaisons arranged during long, boring organ recitals. Servants like you became the silent middlemen, delivering letters, unlocking doors, pretending you didn't see anything even when you saw everything. Now here's the delicious fringe fact. During the reign of Louis XV, the king kept a secret apartment at Versailles, known as the Parc aux Cerfs, or Deer Park, where a rotating selection of mistresses was housed out of public view. Well, relatively out of public view. Everyone knew, but no one talked about it, because discretion was the glue that held this scandalous system together. Gossip was currency, but discretion was power. So where does that leave you tonight? The lady of the house has finally finished her argument. The cousin has been chosen, unfortunate soul, and is now seated politely at the foot of the bed, holding a prayer book and looking like he desperately wants to be anywhere else. You retreat to the shadowed edge of the room as the newlyweds climb into their canopied, absurdly ornate bed. The curtains are drawn halfway, enough to suggest mystery but not enough to imply shame. Someone sneezes. A lute player in the hallway hits a sour note. This is supposed to be romantic, but it feels more like a hostage situation. Now, let's hit the scholarly debate. Were noble marriages ever truly private? Some historians argue that aristocratic intimacy was so ceremonial, so performed, that emotional closeness was nearly impossible. Others suggest that behind all the ritual, real connection did sometimes bloom, quiet, fragile, and often off script. After all, humans are humans, even in powdered wigs. You remember the night last week when the Baroness slipped away from a ball early, leaving behind her jewelled slippers and a husband too drunk to notice. You remember who followed her. You remember because you opened the door, and you're not untouched by all this. There are nights when one of the junior nobles brushes your hand too long, when a visiting diplomat winks from across the servants' entrance, when your own quiet passion smoulders behind polite glances and careful silences. But there's a hierarchy to lust here. Desire flows downward. Consent is often assumed, never asked, so you tread carefully, always. Back in the room, the cousin finally excuses himself, mumbling a prayer and fleeing like he's being chased by the ghosts. The curtains are fully closed now. You hear nothing. You're not supposed to. You step forward to douse the candles, leaving only the soft light of the hearth flickering on gilded moulding and velvet drapery. You exit quietly, footsteps muffled on the thick rug, and close the door behind you. Just outside, the hallway bustles with servants, guards, a drunk minor duke sprawled across a settee. Life in the palace never sleeps. But it does pretend very hard. Later, in your tiny attic chamber under the eaves, you lie awake. You think about how strange it is that the most powerful people in the world have so little freedom, that their most personal acts are judged, witnessed, rumoured, that they make love like actors playing a scene, choreographed, narrated, and always under watch. You shift beneath your own thin blanket, stare at the wooden beams above and wonder what it must be like to touch someone without an audience, without expectations, without the fear that your pleasure might become someone else's entertainment. Because here, in the world of noble beds and nosy servants, even love has to know its lines. You're leaning against a damp, crumbling wall, your shoulder pressing into cracked plaster as you wait your turn to use the shared chamber pot in the corner. It's early evening, sermone, but the sky outside your narrow tenement window is already going dark. You're in a city. Maybe New York, maybe London, maybe Berlin, and it's the late 19th century. The Industrial Revolution has already chewed through the countryside, and now it's sinking its teeth into the cities. You've got smog in your lungs, coal dust in your pillow, and at least 9 other people in this room alone. Welcome to the tenement life, where families stack on top of families and sex is something you have to schedule between snores. You rent space in a single room, about 12 by 10 feet, with your spouse, your 3 children, your sister's family, and a boarder who works the night shift at the factory. There's a stove in one corner, 2 straw mattresses on the floor, and not much else. No running water, no insulation, no doors between sleeping spaces, just a few old bedsheets strung up like makeshift curtains, which offer absolutely no sound barrier, but at least the illusion of dignity. Your body aches. You've been sorting laundry for 12 hours. Your hands raw from soap and bleach. Your spouse is home from laying bricks all day, their clothes stiff with dried sweat. You pass each other silently, too tired to speak, but not too tired to notice the way their fingers brush your arm, just enough to remind you that under all this fatigue there's still want. Here's a historical fact. During the height of urban migration in the 19th century, tenements in major cities often housed multiple families in a single room. Entire buildings had only 1 or 2 toilets per floor. Bathing was rare. Privacy was virtually non-existent. These were not temporary conditions. People lived this way for decades, raising children, working, loving, surviving. And yes, sex still happened. Often. Because people didn't stop wanting each other just because the walls were thin and the baby was crying. They just learned to be cheated. Fast and incredibly strategic. You wait until the kids are asleep, or at least pretending to be. So, your sister is on the other mattress, snoring like a lumberjack. The boarder's not due back for another 2 hours. You give your spouse a look, and they nod. It's a silent agreement. Now or never. You duck behind the sheet. The mattress creaks beneath your weight. You hold your breath as you reach for each other. Movements small, deliberate, and you can't afford to giggle. You can't afford to gasp. You press your faces into the pillow and move together with the careful grace of people who've done this dance before. Quiet, efficient, aching for more time, but knowing better than to take it. And here's your fringe detail. In some tenements, there were written agreements and informal rules among tenants about intimacy hours. Seriously, certain times of the night when couples could assume everyone else would pretend not to hear. It wasn't polite conversation, but it was understood. Survival required cooperation, and cooperation required compromise. You don't rat on your neighbours, and they don't rat on you. But scholars disagree on how people really felt about all this. Some say the constant presence of others killed romance altogether, that in the crush of poverty, physical affection became robotic, resigned, joyless. Others argue the opposite, that hardship forged stronger emotional bonds, that sharing a bed with your spouse, your kids, your cousins, and your in-laws didn't eliminate passion, it sharpened it, turned it into something rare and resilient. A kind of intimacy born in the margins. Back on your side of the sheet, your breath is slowing. You reach for your spouse's hand, hold it for a second longer than usual. Not for comfort, not even for romance, just for the reassurance that you're still human, that you're not just a body filling space in a crowded room. Then you hear the footsteps, the boarder. He's home early. You both freeze, instinctively separating like guilty children, rearranging your clothes, smoothing the blanket. He enters the room quietly, nods once, and collapses onto the floor with his coat still on. No one speaks. The room shifts back into its nightly rhythm. The crackling stove, the snuffle of someone half dreaming, the occasional shout from the alley below. You lie awake for a while, eyes open in the dark, listening to the city breathe around you. A child mumbles something in sleep. The mattress rustles as your spouse turns over. There's no space. Not really. Not for your limbs, not for your thoughts. But there's still a pocket of warmth where their leg touches yours. And in that tiny overlap you find something almost like peace. You think about the woman upstairs who gave birth last week with only a curtain between her and the rest of the floor. About the man 2 rooms down who hasn't spoken since his wife died. About how love somehow still finds a way to exist in this dense, unrelenting pressure cooker of city life. You exhale slowly. Tomorrow the routine starts again. Laundry, cooking, noise, cold, work. But tonight, for just a few minutes, you remembered what it felt like to want, to be wanted, even here, with the walls closing in. And that, in this world, is more than enough. You're squatting beside a fire pit, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl while a group of children chase each other around the edge of the camp. The sun is high, the wind smells like smoke and dust, and you can hear the low thrum of drums in the distance. You're not in a European city now. You're in a traditional indigenous village, maybe on the Great Plains, in the Amazon, the Pacific Islands, or Central Australia. The details shift depending on the geography, but the rhythm is the same. Community, land, ancestry, and a very different idea of what counts as private. Here's the first thing you notice. Nobody is hiding. Not from each other, not from life. Families live together in longhouses, teepees, communal huts, open-air dwellings. Your home is often shared by several generations, and most activities, cooking, bathing, storytelling, even sleep, happen communally. You've got a small woven mat, a fur or a blanket if you're lucky, and maybe a basket with your few belongings. If you're in love with someone, your relationship isn't hidden away. It's not framed by guilt, walls, or whispered confessions. It's something known, a thread in the broader tapestry of the group. Here's your grounded historical fact. In many indigenous societies, the Western concept of privacy didn't really apply, not in the architectural sense, and not in the cultural one. This wasn't due to a lack of development. It was a different value system. Life was lived together. People were rarely alone, and physical intimacy, while still private in its own way, wasn't wrapped in shame. In fact, many Indigenous languages didn't even have a word that directly translated to privacy. Not because the idea didn't matter, but because relationships were just open, understood, seen. You glance across the fire circle and catch your partner's eye. There's no secrecy between you. The elders know, the neighbours know, even the kids have stopped asking questions. You've been together for a while now. Some nights, when the drums slow and the fire crackles low, you share a space in the sleeping hut. No one interrupts, no one pretends not to notice. But no one makes it weird either. And here comes your delightfully quirky fringe fact. In some Polynesian cultures, young lovers would signal their nighttime intentions by placing a flower at the entrance of a family hut or singing a particular tune outside their crush's door. If the feeling was mutual, they'd be welcomed in. If not, the flower was removed or the door left closed. Think of it like Tinder, but with far more tact and zero swiping. Of course, not all intimacy happened inside the communal dwelling. Sometimes couples retreated to designated areas, bushland paths, secluded clearings, riverbanks where you could hear each other's breathe over the sound of frogs and nightbirds. The outdoors itself became a kind of shelter. In societies where the land wasn't owned, where everything belonged to everyone and no one, the world was your bedroom. With a few guidelines, of course. There was always a code. Who could be with whom, when, under what circumstances, rules existed. But the rules weren't designed to shame, they were designed to protect. Now let's stir the scholarly pot a bit. Academics have long debated whether these societies were free in the way modern thinkers like to imagine. Were they truly liberated in terms of sexuality? Or is that just another romantic projection from the outside looking in? Some anthropologists argue that we misinterpret openness as permissiveness, that while there may have been fewer walls, there were just as many social norms, boundaries and expectations, just enforced differently. Others insist that the balance between personal and communal space in these cultures was healthier than in the industrial West, where shame festered in locked bedrooms. Back in your village, the sun is beginning to dip low. Someone is preparing for a ceremony. You help lay out woven mats and brush sand into smooth designs. Your partner's hand brushes yours. It's not subtle. It doesn't have to be. Later you'll find each other in the dark, beneath a canopy of stars, the sound of laughter and humming still echoing through the camp. Your bodies will find their rhythm without fear, without secrecy. Not because everyone's watching, but because no one needs to pretend it isn't happening. You crawl under a shared blanket woven with dyed fibres and stories. Around you others are already settling in. An elder snores softly. A child mumbles in their sleep. The wind plays against the wall of your hut, if you have one, or the tall grass nearby if you don't. You and your partner are quiet, deliberate. There's no rush, no shame, just the comfort of flesh and breath and warmth. You move together in the dark, not worrying about the creaking floorboards or someone listening in. If someone hears, they'll smile, maybe tease you in the morning over roasted yams or corn cakes, but they won't judge. They'll know you're just part of the living web. Love, desire, laughter, grief, all woven together in this random, pulsing community. Later, after your bodies have stilled, you lie awake and listen to the world hum. You think about how different this is from the cities the missionaries talk about, from the books they bring, full of rules and locked doors and dire warnings about sin. You wonder how those people ever managed to be close to each other with all that silence between them. But you don't dwell on it for long. You're tired, full, peaceful, your partner's hand rests on your chest. The moon rises above the treetops, and you, even here with no doors or locks or alone time, feel something deeper than privacy. You feel belonging. You're stirring a pot of lentils, the aroma filling the courtyard. As the baby strapped to your back hiccups herself awake. The sun is dipping low across the compound, casting long shadows on the clay walls, and you can hear your co-wife scolding one of the older kids for stealing a mango off someone else's drying mat. You're part of a polygamous household, and tonight you're cooking, again. Tomorrow, who knows, maybe your night on rotation, maybe not. Either way, your sleeping arrangements and your sex life aren't really private matters. They're a logistical puzzle that everyone around you already knows the pieces to do. The family compound is organised like a living diagram. Your husband's hut at the centre, surrounded by the separate quarters of each wife, her children, and her responsibilities. If you're in 19th century West Africa, It's round huts with thatched roofs. If you're in 18th century rural China, it might be stone rooms with the shared courtyards. In the Islamic Sahel, it's a square house with a veranda where disputes and gossip float on the breeze like cooking smoke. You live with your co-wives and you've learned to call it sisterhood, even on the days it feels more like rivalry and soft shoes. Each of you has a schedule, carefully maintained and culturally reinforced. One night you're summoned to your husband's bed, the next night it's her turn, and the night after that, maybe his favourite, the new one, the one who still doesn't know how to keep her voice down behind the curtain. Here's your historical fact. Polygamy, especially polygyny, where one man has multiple wives, has been practiced throughout history in many parts of the world. It was often a sign of wealth and social status, especially in agrarian and pastoralist societies, where multiple wives meant more children, more hands in the field, and more alliances. But with the prestige came tension, and a complete lack of sexual privacy. Everyone knew who was with whom, when, and for how long. Sometimes even the neighbours kept score. You know your schedule, but sometimes your husband doesn't follow it. He visits someone else on your night, or he skips everyone and goes to the youngest again. When that happens, you smile, you stir your lentils, you keep your voice light, but the others hear the flatness in it. The power dynamics are silent, but they're there, and they shape everything. You try not to resent the others. Most of the time you succeed, you braid each other's hair. You help with the children, you pass down recipes, help carry water, comfort each other during sickness. But at night, when one of you disappears behind the curtain and you're left staring at the rafters above your mat, you wonder if it will ever feel equal. Fringe fact for you, in some polygamous communities, especially among Yoruba or Bedouin groups, co-wives could actually form alliances against the husband when he became too unpredictable or unfair. There are historical accounts of women banding together to protest their husband's favouritism, refusing to cook, moving their mats elsewhere, or even involving elders to shame him into behaving. That's not just pillow talk, that's political strategy. Still, here's the scholarly back and forth. Was this system empowering or oppressive? Some argue that women in polygamous households found sisterhood, economic support and flexibility, especially compared to isolated nuclear wives in rigid monogamous systems. Others point out the emotional toll of forced competition, jealousy, and the near impossibility of carving out genuine intimacy under so many eyes and rules. Which is it? Like most things, it depends on who's telling the story. Tonight you're summoned. Your co-wife raises her eyebrows but says nothing. You nod. You've bathed in cold water from the cistern, combed your hair, rubbed your skin with oil. It's not seduction. It's ritual. Expected. You step quietly across the courtyard, your bare feet brushing against dry leaves. His door is open. The lamp glows low. You step inside. He says nothing, at first, just gestures for you to sit. You talk briefly about the children, the weather, the grain prices, then the lamp is dimmed. He pulls the curtain shut. There is no lock on the door. There never is. Anyone could walk by, cough near the window, or lean close enough to hear. But you move toward him anyway, lying down on the woven mat beside his bed. He touches your arm. You try to focus, to want, to feel wanted, and maybe you do. A little. Not for the romance, not for the thrill, but for the comfort, the stability of being seen, even if only temporarily, as the one chosen tonight. Later, as he sleeps, you slip quietly from the mat and return to your room. One of the children is murmuring in a dream. Your co-wife glances up as you enter, eyes half-lidded with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. She doesn't ask questions. You both lie down, back to back, close but not touching. And yet, this closeness is something, too, a strange intimacy and shared sacrifice, in knowing you're both living through the same silences. Neither of you has privacy, not really. Not for grief, not for desire, not even for pleasure. Everything here is shared. Beds, children, secrets. It's both the comfort and the curse of this life. You drift off with the scent of lentils still on your hands and the faint echo of footsteps in your ears. Tomorrow it will be someone else's night. But tonight, you had your small moment. Even if it was rationed like sugar, weighed like grain, and never truly yours alone. You wake up to the sound of someone snoring and it's not your partner. You roll over, confused for a second, before remembering you're at an inn, not the charming country cosy kind with flower boxes and feather beds. No, this is a rough and ready 18th century roadside inn, the kind where the ale is sour, The beds are lumpy and your roommate is a stranger you met approximately 7 minutes ago. Welcome to the era of shared lodging, where privacy is a luxury reserved for aristocrats and everyone else learns to mind their own business, no matter what they hear through the night. You and your partner are travelling. Could be for trade, work, fleeing something, chasing something, doesn't matter, but there's no way to get from point A to point B without stopping to sleep somewhere, and this is your best option. A creaky, drafty room above a tavern with 3 beds, 1 chamber pot, and an innkeeper who keeps winking like he knows exactly what you two are up to. You got here late. The fire was already dying. The other guest in your room, some sunburned man with calloused hands and a grin too big for his face, was already asleep, boots off, snoring like a dying ox. The innkeeper shrugged and pointed you toward the bed in the corner. "Only one left," he muttered. "Hope you like to cuddle." And here's your historical fact. In early modern Europe and colonial America, it was extremely common for travellers to share beds with strangers at inns. Not rooms, beds. In fact, it was considered normal, even expected, unless you were rich enough to buy the entire room for yourself. Most inns didn't have private chambers. They had sleeping halls with rows of beds and no partitions. People just dealt with it. Now you're here, lying stiff as a plank, sandwiched between your partner and the wall, trying not to think about the stranger just a few feet away, snorting into his blanket and occasionally muttering in his sleep. Your partner shifts beside you, warm and familiar, and despite the circumstances, you feel the flicker of want stir in your chest. It's ridiculous, really. You're both exhausted. The room smells like sweat, beer, and whatever the other guy ate for dinner that's still digesting very loudly. But that flicker doesn't go away. You glance at each other under the threadbare blanket. There's a spark in their eyes, humour, affection, maybe a little mischief. The floorboards creak outside the door as someone stumbles toward the stairs. You wait. Breathe. Listen to the rhythm of the snores, and then, slowly, your hands find each other beneath the blanket. It's careful. Quiet. Mostly still. You press your foreheads together, eyes closed, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. This isn't seduction, it's survival. It's clinging to intimacy in the least intimate setting imaginable. Every move has to be calculated, no creaking, no shifting, no sighing too loud. It's like trying to have sex inside a library during an earthquake while pretending you're asleep. And here's your fringe fact. Some inns made a business out of this awkwardness. There are records of certain 18th century English taverns charging extra to not have to share a bed with a stranger. 1 penny for the night, 2 if you want your own space. They didn't sell privacy. They sold the possibility of it, and only to those who could afford it. So what do the scholars say about this setup? Some historians argue that these shared beds, while uncomfortable, fostered a kind of pragmatic camaraderie. People accepted each other's bodies, smells, noises. There was no pretense. Others suggest it was more complicated, that the forced proximity created stress, repressed desires, and sometimes crossed boundaries no one talked about in the morning. It's one thing to share a room. It's another to hear a stranger breathing 6 inches from your neck while you're trying to share a moment with someone you love. Back in your corner of the bed, you and your partner lie still again. The moment's passed, or maybe it never fully arrived. But even this, the closeness, the quiet joke, the feel of their hand in yours, is something. You wrap your arms around them and breathe slowly, syncing your rhythm to theirs. The snoring continues. The wind whistles through the loose window frame. Somewhere downstairs, someone shouts about spilled ale. You wonder if the man beside you is really asleep, or if he's just pretending not to notice. Either way, no one's going to say anything. That's the unspoken rule of inns like this. You mind your own, and everyone else pretends they didn't hear a thing. Tomorrow morning you'll nod politely, maybe make awkward small talk while lacing your boots, then you'll move on. Another road, another town, another night in another bed that isn't yours. But for now, you stay curled up, half asleep, half tense, fully aware that you're not alone, and never really will be. As long as you're travelling through this world with empty pockets and a body that needs rest, and yet somehow you find rest anyway. Because in all the noise and closeness, all the discomfort and shared space, you've still managed to carve out something yours, even if it's just a heartbeat, a hand, and the softest whisper between 2 people who still remember how to want each other, quietly, cleverly, just under the breath. You're kneeling in the dirt behind a row of sugarcane, heart hammering, breath shallow, eyes darting toward the overseer's cabin across the field. The sun has just set, but the heat still clings to your skin like punishment. Mosquitoes hum around your ears, the ground is damp and smells like rot. Somewhere nearby, frogs croak loudly, as if trying to cover the sound of your whispering. You're not supposed to be here. Not like this. You're not supposed to be doing anything that resembles intimacy. But tonight, you are. Because the rules didn't leave you with many choices, and even fewer places to just be human. You're on a plantation in the American South, or maybe the Caribbean, or Brazil. The specifics vary, but the conditions are the same. You're enslaved, and every aspect of your life is controlled. Who you speak to, what you eat, where you sleep, whether you're allowed to marry, who gets to touch your body, and whether you have any say in it. Spoiler, you usually don't. And yet somehow, people still fall in love. Still sneak into each other's arms when the sun goes down, and the overseer finally turns in for the night. Still risk everything just to feel close, even for a moment. Here's your historical fact. Enslaved people in the Americas often formed marriages and long-term relationships despite being denied any legal recognition of those bonds. In many plantation systems, enslaved couples were forced to live separately and could only see each other on Sundays or after dark. Marriage happened through ceremonies in the quarters, sometimes jumping the broom, sometimes just a whispered promise in the night. But these relationships were always under threat, of zbetel, of punishment, of complete erasure. You and your partner are meeting in secret, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because being seen would invite consequences neither of you can afford. A beating, separation, worse, so you have waited until the last light fell behind the trees, until the others in the quarters began to drift off into restless sleep, until even the dogs stopped barking. You're behind the cookhouse now, hidden in the dark. Their hands are on your waist, yours are on their shoulders. Neither of you speaks louder than a breath. Your bodies pressed together, not out of lust, but out of hunger. Hunger for closeness, for softness, for something that isn't labour or pain. Here's your fringe fact. Some plantation owners actually encouraged reproduction among the enslaved, not because they supported families, but because more births meant more slaves. Some even arranged breeding between people they chose, regardless of any existing partnerships. It was institutional violation disguised as management. Against that backdrop, every real relationship, every genuine kiss or late-night touch became a quiet act of rebellion. So how do historians talk about love in the quarters? Carefully. Some argue that romance couldn't truly exist under slavery, because love requires freedom, and these people had none. Others insist that intimacy under oppression is still intimacy, that in fact, it becomes even more precious. A seed planted in poisoned soil is still a seed, and if it grows, it's a miracle, one that shouldn't be dismissed. Back in the shadows, you lower yourself to the ground, pulling your partner down with you. The earth is cool, damp, uncomfortable, but you barely notice. You're too focused on their mouth, their breath, the press of their chest against yours. You don't have time for gentleness, you barely have time at all. Every second feels like it's borrowed from someone else's world, a world where people get beds, locks on doors, a future together. You whisper to each other, just names, just I missed you, just I needed this. You try not to cry, that would make noise, that would make it real. So instead, you focus on the feeling of their hand in yours, of lips brushing against your temple, of something that almost feels like peace, even if it's surrounded by a threat. Afterward, you sit together, tangled up like roots, until the stars start to fade and the frogs get quiet again. You can't sleep out here. If you're found missing from your quarters, the lash will come before questions. So you kiss them once more, soft and slow, and then slip away through the cane back toward your side of the cabin. Back toward the world that never really lets you forget what you are in its eyes. But for just those few minutes, you weren't a tool, you weren't a body to be counted, whipped, or sold. You were a person, someone loved, someone wanted, someone who got to choose, even if only briefly, who to give your heart and your body to. You crawl into your straw pallet just before the rooster starts crowing. Your back aches. Your fingers are still streaked with soil. Around you others shift in their sleep, some murmuring, some scared. You close your eyes, pretend the night was longer, pretend it's still happening. Because when your entire world is watched, owned, and stripped of softness, love, real chosen love, isn't just resistance. It's everything. You're hunched over inside a round felt tent, smoothing a sleeping mat while the wind outside howls like it's got a personal vendetta. The fire in the centre of the yurt crackles faintly, barely cutting the chill, and smoke curls upward through the opening at the top. Around you, the sounds of your family ripple through the thick air. Someone grinding millet, a child laughing, a goat complaining just outside the flap. You're on the steppes of Central Asia, a nomad among nomads, where your entire house can be dismantled in under an hour. But your personal life? That's always on display. You live in close quarters, not because you're poor, but because that's how the system works. Space isn't divided the way modern life imagines it. There's no hallway, no bedroom, no bathroom. Just zones, sleeping, cooking, praying. All within one circular room, with woven rugs on the walls and carefully arranged animal hides on the floor. You know exactly who's breathing next to you at night, and they know who you're breathing with. Here's your historical fact. For many nomadic societies, Mongol, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Turkic, communal living in yurts or gurs was standard. The structure was practical, built to withstand high winds and bitter cold. But its circular open design made privacy nearly impossible. Most families lived, slept, and did everything else in one shared space. Curtains or wooden screens might be used, but only occasionally and only for symbolic separation, such as for elders or honoured guests. So where exactly are you supposed to go when desire creeps in? When your partner gives you that look over the mutton stew, or brushes your fingers a little too long while passing a bowl, you can't exactly duck into another room, there isn't one. You can't sneak outside, there's a blizzard and at least 3 curious yaks out there. And everyone else in the yurt? They're not sleeping nearly as deeply as they pretend to be. You and your partner wait. You know the rhythms of the tent. You know when the grandmother's breathing deepens into snores, when the baby finally stops fussing, when the fire's embers die low enough that your shadows won't dance against the hide walls. That's when you move, slowly, subtly, under the blanket you share with the 2 other people. No words, just the practiced language of eyes and fingertips, of shifting knees and held breath. Here's your fringe detail. In some nomadic cultures, young couples were allowed night courtship rituals, where a man would enter a young woman's tent at night with parental permission or under agreed rules. Sometimes he stayed the night. Sometimes he was expected to leave before sunrise. Some traditions even had ritual bedding arrangements where sex was allowed, but full marriage had to follow if pregnancy did. Basically, it was intimacy on a trial run with community guidelines attached. But you're already married, and that doesn't make things easier, it just means everyone really knows what you're doing when the blankets start rustling. You try not to laugh when your cousin mutters something about wolves mating in spring and rolls over with suspiciously exaggerated grumbling. It's all part of the game, the teasing, the shared understanding that everyone lives on top of each other and that privacy is something you borrow, not own. And here's where scholars argue, was this lack of privacy stifling or freeing? Some believe it created a deep communal empathy, everyone understanding everyone's needs, rhythms, and boundaries because you had no choice. Others suggest it created emotional claustrophobia, especially for women whose bodies were often monitored more closely. It likely depended on your role, your gender, and how well your family handled shared space. But back in your yurt right now, you don't have time for sociology. You're focused on the warmth of your partner's skin, on the way your legs brush together under the sheepskin. You're not trying to make noise, you're not even moving much. Just that slow, secret rhythm, more affection than urgency, a communication built in breath. The knowledge that this is your moment, however brief, in a world that rarely gives you one. When it's over, you don't separate. You stay tangled, your arm draped across their chest, your face pressed to their shoulder. You both stare at the ceiling, watching the smoke curl through the centre hole like a ghost escaping into the night. No one says anything, but in the morning, your older brother will smirk, your mother will pass you extra tea, and someone, definitely your cousin, will bleat like a goat just a little too meaningfully. Still, no one shames you. This isn't a culture of shame, it's a culture of endurance, resilience, adaptability. You all live too close to lie to each other. You've heard your parents arguing in the dark, you've seen your uncle weep when he thought no one was looking. You've laughed during childbirth, buried children together, sung lullabies as a group. In a space this tight, your lives are braided. And sometimes, that's uncomfortable. But it also means you're never truly alone. You close your eyes, still listening to the wind outside. Your partner's hand curls around yours. The fire is almost out. You'll have to rise before dawn to feed the animals, milk the sheep, mend the roof where the storm tore it again. But tonight, in this small, smoky shared circle of life, You carved out something soft and private, right in the open, and somehow that feels more intimate than any locked door ever could. You're sitting on the edge of a stiff-backed chair, corset pressing into your ribs, trying very hard not to let your ankle show too much as you sip your tea. The wallpaper is floral. The clock ticks louder than your heartbeat. And your husband, seated across the room reading a newspaper he's not really reading, hasn't made eye contact with you since breakfast. You're in a respectable Victorian household, and you've been married for 2 years, but you still feel like you're dating a stranger under house arrest. Because here in 19th century England, sex isn't just private, it's practically imaginary. The drawing room is quiet. Too quiet. You'd kill for a scandalous piano chord or even a sneeze. Anything to break the oppressive stillness that hangs in the air like a lace curtain. There are servants somewhere, of course, moving just beyond the threshold with the grace and silence of ghosts. You're never truly alone in this house, and that's part of the problem. Even when the door's closed, even when the drapes are drawn, you feel the eyes, real or imagined, watching every movement, every cough, every glance held too long. And that corset is not just a fashion statement, it's armour. It cinches you in, holds everything tight, trains your body to behave properly. Desire is not supposed to escape, not from your mouth, your posture, or your imagination, but oh, it does, late at night. When you hear him cross the creaky floorboards toward your shared, yet somehow still separate, bed. When his hand brushes yours and lingers just a moment too long. When you think about the fact that no one ever actually told you what a wedding night was supposed to feel like. Here's your historical fact. Victorian society, especially in the middle and upper classes, championed a culture of sexual restraint, particularly for women. The ideal Victorian woman was modest, passive, and focused on domesticity and motherhood. Sexual desire, that was for men, or for those dreadful women who wrote poetry and didn't comb their hair. Within marriage, sex was often reduced to a duty, a quiet, emotionless performance carried out with the lights off and the curtains closed. Now here's a quirky fringe fact. Despite the repression, Victorians were obsessed with coded flirtation. Fans, gloves, parasols, each had its own language. A dropped handkerchief might mean I desire you. A specific way of holding your teacup could signal a secret rendezvous. It was like an entire flirtation-based Morse code system, designed to bypass the constraints of politeness without ever having to say a single improper word. So back to your chair. You clear your throat. He lowers his paper slightly. Your eyes meet. Just briefly, there's something in his look. Hesitation, affection, a question you're both too trained to up, or you murmur something about going upstairs. He says he'll be along shortly. You enter the bedroom, too cold, too big, and so clean it feels like a stage set. The bed is neatly made, the nightgown is already folded on the pillow. You begin the long, tedious process of undressing layer by layer. Bodice, petticoat, corset, stockings, each removed with the care of someone hiding dynamite instead of a body. When he joins you, neither of you speaks. He locks the door, not because you expect an intruder, but because even the idea of being walked in on is mortifying. He undresses quickly as if embarrassed by his own body and slips under the sheet. There's no candlelight, no conversation, just bodies finding each other under stiff linen, trying to remember what this is supposed to feel like. You kiss, briefly. He touches you gently, but as if he's afraid to do it wrong. You close your eyes and try not to think of laundry, or dinner guests, or the child you're expected to produce before the year is out. Here's where historians argue. Was Victorian marriage really this cold, this clinical? Some say yes, pointing to etiquette manuals that emphasised duty over pleasure and warned women that a wise bride will not permit her husband to see her undressed. Others argue there was far more warmth and affection behind closed doors, just hidden under layers of euphemism and polite repression. They point to the letters, the ones that didn't survive public censors, where passion dripped between the lines, wrapped in metaphors and burning sighs. You're not sure which side you believe. All you know is that when he holds you afterward, his arm awkwardly across your side, it's the most intimate moment you've had all day. Not the sex, but the silence that follows, the exhale, the absence of pretense. You shift to face him, in the dark, just enough to brush your lips to his shoulder. He doesn't say anything, but you feel the way his hand curls around yours. A silent thank you, or maybe just I see you. In the morning you'll button up again, literally and figuratively. The house will fill with footsteps and dishes and polite conversation. You'll sit in your chair, he'll open his paper, but maybe, just maybe, you'll let your fingers graze his as he passes you the cream. Not much, not a scandal. Just enough to remind you both that something still simmers beneath the lace and linen and rules. You're coughing into the sleeve of your uniform, standing in a washroom that smells like oil, sweat and soap barely masking mould. There's a thin pipe dripping overhead, a stack of worn towels on a broken shelf, and 3 other workers trying to wash up next to you like you all haven't been elbow to elbow in the factory since before sunrise. Welcome to the dormitories of the Industrial Revolution. Whether you're in Manchester, Massachusetts, or somewhere in Guangdong a century later, you work, you eat, you sleep, you do it all in shifts. And privacy? That's something the management forgot to install. You and your partner both live in the same building. Maybe you met on the assembly line. Maybe you were thrown into the same bunk room and learned to like each other somewhere between the 3 a.m. bell and the broken toilet down the hall. Romance wasn't the plan, but it's something. A moment of softness in this world of relentless noise and metal and grey. The dormitories are separated by gender, in theory. But when has that ever really stopped anyone? Here's your historical fact. During the height of the Industrial Revolution, thousands of workers, especially young women, lived in factory-owned dormitories. The Lowell Mill girls in Massachusetts, for instance, were housed in closely supervised boarding houses with strict moral codes. In other cities and industries, conditions were rougher. Bunks stacked 3 high, windows nailed shut, and little concern for anything beyond output. Relationships between workers were discouraged but rampant. Management wanted obedience, not entanglements. Love slowed down the machines. You wait until curfew. After the bell rings, the floor creaks under the weight of exhausted footsteps. Some of the girls are already asleep, collapsed in their bunks with their boots still on. You lie still for a while, eyes on the shadowy ceiling, until you hear the knock, a soft 3-tap signal you and your partner came up with weeks ago. You ease out of bed, careful not to jostle the springs, and tiptoe down the corridor. The laundry room is always unlocked. Management assumes no one wants to linger where the rats live. But for you two, it's perfect, dim, forgotten, and somehow still more romantic than any letter a Victorian novelist ever wrote. They're already there, perched on the edge of a basin. Their hair's still damp from their shift at the dyeing station, and their hands are stained blue at the fingertips. You kiss them anyway, it's not glamorous. The sink leaks, the walls are sweating, there's a pile of someone's half-washed long johns in the corner. But when they pull you in and press their forehead to yours, none of that matters. Because here, between steam pipes and rust, you're not just another body on the line, you're you, wanted, chosen. Here's your fringe fact. In some factory dormitories in the 19th and early 20th centuries, workers would pass notes between laundry baskets or sneak glances through steam-filled corridors just to keep a romance alive. Some dormitories even had unofficial lovers' corners, where the floorboards creaked in a certain rhythm to warn you if someone was coming. These weren't lovers with leisure. These were people carving out scraps of passion from days built to grind it away. But scholars debate whether these relationships were liberating or simply another form of distraction in a system rigged for burnout. Were they genuine love stories or survival strategies? Some argue these micro-romances were brief flashes of resistance, proof that the human heart refuses to be streamlined. Others see them as byproducts of proximity, more need than desire. Maybe it was both. Back in the laundry room, you sit together in silence after the kiss, your legs dangling over the tiled floor. You talk in whispers, about quitting, about running away, about finding work on a farm where the sky's actually visible. None of it's realistic. But the fantasy is the point. It's a pressure valve, a way to imagine that your life isn't limited to 14-hour shifts and shared socks. Then the pipe groans, and you both jump. Time to move. You kiss again, quick but full of all the things you can't say with the machines roaring all day. Then you part ways, vanishing back into the halls. You return to your bunk. The girl above you mutters in her sleep. Someone else coughs. The walls hum with the building's breath. But your skin still tingles from their hands. In the morning, you'll see them again across the canteen. They won't wave, just a nod. A flash of eyes, the tiniest smile. And that'll be enough. Because in this world, love has to be small, hidden, compressed into moments shorter than the workday whistle. You lie on your side facing the wall. The pillow smells like starch and metal. Your body aches. Your eyes burn, but there's a softness in you now that wasn't there before, a quiet thrill under the fatigue, a reminder that you're more than your labour. Because even when the machines are loud and the lights never dim, and the dorm smells like boiled socks, people sort of still find ways to reach each other, to touch, to want, to fall in love between the clatter of gears, and to remember just for a breath that they are not cogs. You're stirring a pot of beans over a crackling hearth, one eye on the window where the horizon glows orange with the last flickers of daylight. The cabin smells like wood smoke and sweat. The baby's crying, again, and you haven't even had time to pull the wash off the line. It's the 1830s, maybe 1840s, and you're living on the American frontier out where the roads haven't quite reached. The church bell is a 2-day ride away, and the nearest neighbour is close enough to borrow sugar, but also close enough to hear everything that goes bump in the night, including you. Your house is small. 1 room, log walls, dirt floor if you're still setting up rough-sawn planks if you're lucky. The bed is tucked into a corner half covered by a scratchy quilt and a vague sense of obligation. The kids sleep on pallets nearby, sometimes with their feet in each other's faces. There's no second floor, no locked doors, no distance, just shared air, shared chores and shared exhaustion. You and your partner make it work, but privacy, that's a fantasy for the fancy folks back east with parlours and curtains and doors that actually shut. Out here, even a kiss has to be carefully timed, preferably when the children are outside, the soup isn't burning, and no one's standing on your porch with a basket of turnips and too many questions. Here's your historical fact. Frontier homes in the early United States were typically one-room cabins, especially during the initial settlement years. The idea of separate bedrooms was a luxury that came much later. Families, regardless of size, shared that space for sleeping, eating and everything else, which meant that intimacy, emotional or physical, had to squeeze itself into the quiet cracks of the day, hidden between chores, kids and the general chaos of survival. You finish stirring the beans, take the baby off your hip and pass them to your eldest, who's finally stopped poking the fire. You lock eyes with your partner. There's something unspoken there, a question, a spark. You both know it's been days, weeks maybe. Every time you've cheered, someone's knocked, cried, or vomited at precisely the wrong moment. Later, after the children have fallen into the kind of sleep that only comes from climbing trees and running barefoot for 10 hours straight, you sit quietly together by the fire. The flames dance low, casting gold against the log walls. The crickets outside are loud. A whip-poor-will calls from the trees. You nudge their hand. They squeeze yours. You say nothing as you both rise and move toward the bed. It creaks. Everything creaks. You move slowly, careful not to wake the small army sprawled out near your feet. Under the quilt, you shift closer. There's no finesse, no elaborate foreplay, but there is warmth, a rhythm, a breath against your neck that reminds you that you're still here, still desired, still more than a cook, a parent, a carpenter, a farmer. You're a lover too, at least for these few stolen minutes. Here's your fringe fact. Some couples on the frontier made use of barns, root cellars, or even outhouses when they needed privacy. Not exactly glamorous, but sometimes the only option. And yes, there are accounts of folks taking a walk into the woods together that was less about admiring the foliage and more about needing 30 uninterrupted minutes away from their children, in-laws, and whoever was just stopping by. Scholars are split on how frontier life affected intimacy. Some argue the hardship bonded couples deeply, emotionally and physically, that their survival relied on cooperation, and from that came a form of love far stronger than anything in the drawing rooms of Boston. Others suggest the relentlessness of pioneer life left little room for romance. That sex became just another chore, one more task to cross off before dawn. You wouldn't call it a chore. Not tonight, not when your partner runs a hand slowly along your back, pressing their forehead to yours, not when your body responds with such immediate recognition, like muscle memory that doesn't fade even after endless days of dust, dishes and drying meat. You move together quietly, not passionless, just practiced. Efficient, yes, but still meaningful. There's a tenderness here that doesn't need music or moonlight. Just two people trying to stay connected while the rest of the world demands so much from them. You stifle a laugh when one of the kids rolls over and lets out a spectacular snore. You bury your face into your partner's shoulder, trying not to make the bed squeak too much. Afterward, you lie tangled together, legs overlapping, Heart slowed, breath mingled in the dark. You don't speak, there's no need. The fire's almost out. The night is still. Outside, the stars sprawl wide across the black sky like they were thrown there by accident. You think about how much of your life is shared. Every chore, every moment, every sigh. But here, in this creaky old bed, with your partner's chest rising against your back, there's something that's just yours. Something soft, undisturbed. A quiet rebellion against the chaos of pioneer living. And it's enough, for now, because tomorrow will bring more noise, more need, more mud. But tonight you made space, no room to call your own, but a moment carved out like a little corner of light. Reminder that love lives here too, even if the walls are thin and the baby cries again in 5 minutes. You're standing at the edge of a marble-floored bedchamber, trying to keep your face unreadable as the Queen's ladies remove her shoes and unpin her elaborate hairstyle. It's late, somewhere past midnight, but no one here sleeps early. Not the monarch, not the nobles orbiting her like moons, and certainly not you. You're a royal servant stationed inside the Palace of Versailles, Schönbrunn, or some other monument to overcompensation. And here's the wildest part. Even royalty can't get any privacy. The room is enormous. Painted ceilings, gold filigree, silk tapestries, and absolutely no secrets. The bed itself is practically a stage, tall and curtained, and surrounded by protocol. Every act, every gesture, has a correct sequence. You've seen it before. The royal couple enters, flanked by high-ranking nobles, priests, or even ambassadors. A few ceremonial words are spoken. The bedclothes are turned down. Someone, yes, someone else, is tasked with placing a leg of the Queen beneath the sheets first, followed by the King. Then everyone files out, nodding solemnly, as if they haven't just witnessed two people being tucked in like a pair of ceremonial dolls. Here's your historical fact. In early modern European courts, especially in France and parts of the Habsburg Empire, the royal marriage bed was a site of public ritual. The coucher and lever ceremonies marked not only bedtime and waking, but reinforced the monarch's status and symbolic fertility. A royal couple's wedding night might be actually witnessed, by select courtiers, to ensure that the union was consummated. The production of an heir wasn't private business, it was a national interest. And let's not forget this fringe gem. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's marriage was such a matter of public obsession that people speculated for years about whether they were sleeping together. Pamphlets, poems, and court gossip dissected their bedroom habits like tabloid columns centuries ahead of schedule. When the couple finally consummated their marriage after several awkward years of technical delays, it wasn't just news, it was practically policy. You watch as the Queen is finally alone, or as alone as she ever gets. The doors are shut, the torches dimmed. You retreat into the shadows, not quite dismissed, but not present either. Just outside the room, other attendants wait, ready to respond to the slightest summon. You wonder, how can anyone desire each other with a schedule like this? How do you reach for your partner when everyone is watching, when everything you do might be used to measure national stability? And here's where the scholarly debate heats up. Was royal intimacy genuine, or was it always theatre, a transaction of dynasty and duty? Some historians argue that among the palace's golden cages, affection could bloom quietly behind closed doors and heavy drapes. Others insist that the constant pressure, produce heirs, behave impeccably, never show weakness, turned love into performance and performance into burden, and in truth, it probably depended on the couple. Take your monarch, for instance. You've seen the looks exchanged, sharp, fleeting, weighted. You've seen the quiet tension, the glove touches that last a second too long. You know they're not machines, even if the court treats them like divine clockwork. So when the king slips into the bedchamber tonight without fanfare, forgoing the usual trumpet of servants, you pretend not to notice. Inside the chamber, behind the velvet curtain, they whisper. They laugh, low and tired. You hear the creak of the mattress. You think about how bizarre it is that this, the most intimate thing humans can do, is wrapped in so many rules it can barely breathe. And yet, they do it. Not just the act, but the reaching for one another. Even when everything is choreographed, even when every movement is dissected by jealous rivals and paranoid ministers, even when their own hearts might be trapped under 5 layers of expectation and powdered wigs, they still find each other in the dark. Your corner of the hallway smells like wax and perfume. You lean against the wall, eyes closed, listening to the muffled conversation behind the door. It's not erotic, not scandalous. Oh, just real. Tired voices, A pause, a moment of silence that says more than ceremony ever could. Eventually footsteps echo down the corridor. Another servant arriving late, holding linens and looking guilty. You nod, step aside. The moment breaks. The world resumes. In the morning, the monarchs will rise at the appointed time. Attendants will dress them. Breakfast will be served under frescoed ceilings. Gossip will flood the salons. And the night they shared, whatever happened in it, will disappear under the glare of gold and power. But you'll remember. Not the details, not the sounds, just the fact that for one night they were people first. Not symbols, not monarchs, just two humans who found a tiny sliver of privacy inside a room where none was supposed to exist. Later, as you walk through the servants' passage past the royal nursery and the endless corridors lined with portraits of dead people who probably also had awkward sex in front of a priest, you chuckle to yourself. You think about how absurd it is to be powerful enough to rule a continent, but not powerful enough to have 5 uninterrupted minutes to take your spouse's hand without someone writing it down. Because in a palace full of rooms, privacy remains the one thing even kings have to steal. You're passing around a chipped mug of herbal tea, bare feet shuffling across worn floorboards as someone strums a guitar softly in the corner. The air smells like patchouli, lentils and incense, and everyone here is smiling just a little too knowingly. It's the late 1960s. Or maybe the early 70s, and you're living in a commune. Not visiting, not experimenting, living. This isn't a weekend escape from the city. This is your life now. Welcome to the age of radical freedom, tie-dye sheets, and, depending on the day, either complete sexual liberation or the most awkward group cuddle of your life. Your room, if you can call it that, has no door. Just a hanging curtain of beads and thrift store fabric, with a mattress on the floor and someone else's cat sleeping in the sunbeam. You don't own much. No one here does. You share food, chores, instruments, lovers, depending on the rules of the day, which are less rules and more shifting agreements determined by the collective during last week's moon circle. Privacy? That's a capitalist illusion, man. Or at least that's what Sky says while making tofu over an open flame. Here's your historical fact. From the late 1960s through the early 80s, intentional communities, also called communes, sprouted all over the United States, Western Europe, and beyond. Many were founded on ideals of equality, anti-materialism and sexual freedom, influenced by Eastern philosophy, psychedelics, anti-war politics, and a collective yearning to escape the system. These communities aimed to redefine love, partnership, and even ownership of one's body. Monogamy was questioned. So was privacy. After all, if you truly belong to everyone, shouldn't love be shared too? Which brings us to the bed. Or rather, the room with 3 mattresses and a beanbag that smells like pot and patchouli. Tonight, you and your partner have found a rare window of semi-solitude, meaning only one other person is asleep in the same room, and the dish have got earplugs into them. Or at least you hope they do. You glance at each other, quietly laughing, then settle onto the mattress and pull the woven blanket over your heads like kids telling ghost stories. And that's the thing, it's not that you can't have sex in this place, it's that you're never really sure what sex means anymore. You might be committed to each other, but you've also each been with other people in the house. It was encouraged, expected even. You've tried to see it as expansive, revolutionary, but sometimes it just feels exhausting, like there's no space to figure out what you want, because everything is already shared, dissected and blessed with too much eye contact. Still, tonight, under this blanket, in the soft hush of shared breathing and muffled music, you find each other again, not as community members, not as activists or free spirits, just two people who miss what it feels like to be alone together. Your bodies fit in familiar ways. Your hands know the roadmap. There's no pretense here, just the ache to reconnect, quietly in a place that's always loud about love. And here's your fringe fact. Some communes instituted affinity charts to help map out who was romantically involved with whom, who had agreed to be open, who preferred closed relationships, and who was fluid. One commune in Vermont reportedly used colour-coded stickers on their doorframes to indicate their availability. Green for open, yellow for ask first, and red for do not disturb. Basically, polyamory with paperwork. But did it work? That's where scholars still argue. Some say the sexual openness of commune life empowered people to escape restrictive puritanical norms. Others insist it created new pressures, especially for women, to perform emotional and physical availability in the name of revolution. Feminist critiques from the era point out that free love often translated to men do what they want and women get guilt-tripped for asking for a night off. Not exactly utopia. Back on your mattress, you and your partner pause, breathless, sweaty, tangled. You laugh again, softly this time, and one of you jokes about how you'll be assigned to sweep the barn tomorrow as punishment for hoarding affection. You lie back on the pillow, hand in theirs, trying to remember what it felt like before everything was shared, before the we turned into a political slogan, before love became another form of activism. And yet, there's something beautiful here too. You've seen couples blossom in this chaos. You've seen strangers hold each other with more tenderness than most marriages manage. You've seen connection work, even if it looks different from what you grew up believing was normal. The love in this house is real, messy, flawed, but real. You drift off like that, tangled and unsure, the guitar still playing, someone giggling softly in the next room. Tomorrow there will be group breakfast, maybe a conflict resolution circle, maybe a surprise clothing optional meditation. But for now, you've carved out a moment of stillness in the middle of ideological noise, a flicker of old-fashioned closeness dressed in New Age linens. Because even in a place where love is supposed to be shared equally, the human heart sometimes just wants one person, one look, one night, uncomplicated. Even if you have to whisper to keep it, you're holding a metal bowl under a plastic spigot, waiting for the drips to gather into enough water to rinse the salt from your face. The sun has just gone down behind a row of UN-issued tents, and everything glows in that strange bluish light that comes before real darkness. You're in a refugee camp, maybe Jordan, maybe Sudan, maybe the edge of Greece. You've been here for weeks or months, maybe longer. No one really keeps track anymore, and tonight, like every night, you're trying to find a place to just be with the person you love, or at least want, without 1,000 other eyes watching. Your shelter is a canvas tent with a zippered flap, 2 folding cots and a thermal blanket you found discarded behind the supply station. Privacy? It's a joke. Your neighbours are inches away on every side. You can hear them cough, argue, cry into their sleep, and they can hear you. It's not malicious. It's just the reality of living this close, this desperate, with people who are all trying to survive the same slow, grinding purgatory. Your partner lives 2 tents down, or 3. It shifts as new families arrive and old ones move deeper into the camp or disappear entirely. You're not officially together. No one in the camp is. There's no space for official anything. But when the sun goes down and the guard rotations become more predictable, you sometimes slip into each other's tents. Not always to have sex. Sometimes just to touch, or sometimes just to be reminded that your body belongs to you, not to the state, the trauma, or the paperwork. Here's your historical fact. Across conflicts and displacements, World War II, or the Balkan Wars, the Syrian crisis, Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, refugee camps have always been spaces where intimacy continues to exist despite overwhelming odds. While humanitarian systems often overlook the emotional and sexual needs of displaced people, relationships still form and sex still happens. Not because it's convenient, but because it's necessary, for comfort, for control, for proof that life hasn't completely stopped. You zip the tent closed behind you and sit on the cot. It creaks. Everything here creaks. Your partner follows you in, ducking to avoid the low ceiling. You both know the routine. Keep your voices low, your movements careful, and never let your silhouette do anything obvious against the tent wall. Even the shadows betray you. They sit beside you, knees touching. You don't kiss right away. You're too tired, too aware of the 100 people within 10 feet. Instead, you touch their wrist, thumb brushing over the skin. That's all. That's enough to start. Here's your fringe fact. In some refugee camps, humanitarian agencies quietly distribute condoms and menstrual supplies, not because they officially approve of sexual activity in temporary shelters, but because they know it's happening, and pretending otherwise would only make things worse. One NGO worker once described it as acknowledged denial, a nod toward reality without ever officially speaking its name. But here's where scholars get tangled. Should intimacy be protected in crisis zones? Is it a right or a risk? Some argue that in high trauma environments, relationships provide critical psychological grounding. Others worry about consent imbalance and the vulnerabilities that arise when basic needs aren't met. When does a kiss become a negotiation? When does a caress become a transaction? You think about that sometimes, whether your closeness is a lifeline or just another coping mechanism. But tonight, you don't want to analyse it. You just want to feel. You pull the blanket up around your shoulders and lean in. Your partner's hands are rough, too much hauling water, too much digging for firewood, but gentle. You slide down together onto the cot, limbs awkward in the narrow space, feet bumping into a plastic bin full of rice and soap. It's not romantic, it's not smooth, but it's real. You move together slowly, silently, the fabric of the cot crinkling beneath you. Every sound outside feels amplified. The low murmur of another tense radio, a distant baby crying, the stomping of boots near the perimeter fence. But inside this tiny square of canvas, there's warmth, there's closeness, there's you and them. You don't say I love you, not here. Words like that don't get said out loud in places like this. They live in glances, in shared crackers, in the way you reach for each other when the helicopters pass overhead. You don't ask for promises. You don't talk about tomorrow. You just hold each other afterward, breathing in sync, eyes fixed on the canvas ceiling that ripples gently with the wind. It smells like dust and body heat. You think of all the beds you've slept in before this, your own, a hotel once, a cousin's couch. You think of how all of them felt safer, but none of them felt more earned. You stay like that until the camp begins to stir again. Someone coughing, someone lighting a small fire outside, You whisper goodbye. They unzip the flap and slip out, back into the maze of tents. You lie still. Your hand touches the empty place where they just were, and for a second it feels like something sacred. Like you've built a home out of nothing but warmth and borrowed time. Tomorrow there will be checkpoints, forms, lines for food, 1,000 indignities. But tonight, for a brief, impossible moment, you remembered that you are still capable of choosing, of wanting, of reaching for another human being without asking anyone's permission. And in this place, that might be the most private act of all. You're lying on a narrow cot that groans with every shift, your boots still on because there's nowhere to put them that won't be touched by someone else's feet. The light bulb above you flickers, half dead, casting pale yellow shadows on the walls of a barracks that smells like steel polish, chalky soap and too many people breathing too close. You're in a military camp, maybe a US boot camp in the 40s, a Red Army dugout during World War II, British training camp in Egypt, or even a women's munitions dorm near Detroit. Doesn't really matter. It's wartime and the rules are different now. Everything is rationed. Food, time, space, affection. Especially affection. Your bunkmates are snoring already, arms draped over their faces or tucked beneath thin military blankets. The cot beside yours is occupied by someone who talks in their sleep. The one above creaks every time the wind slams the tin roof. There's no room here for privacy, and even less for sentiment. You're here to serve, to obey, to harden. And yet somehow, desire doesn't care. It creeps in anyway, under the radar, in moments no one sees, until they do. Here's your historical fact. During World War II and the decades that followed, soldiers and war workers were often housed in overcrowded barracks, temporary housing, and factory dorms with almost no personal space. Romantic relationships, especially same-sex ones, were heavily policed, sometimes criminalised, and yet they flourished in whispers and glances. Letters were coded, meetings were brief, whole lives were reduced to the spaces between inspections. You met someone here, maybe they bunk 2 rows down, maybe they work in the hangar next door, maybe they pass you folded notes during drills or smile just a little too long during roll call. Whatever it is, it's subtle. It has to be. You've had only a few real conversations, but your hands brushed once in the supply room and you've thought about it every night since. Tonight, there's a gap in the usual chaos. A late patrol, a missed curfew check. You step outside into the cold night, boots crunching gravel, trying not to look like you're sneaking. You're not supposed to sneak. That would imply intent, and intent makes it dangerous. But they're already waiting by the shed, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, trying to look casual and failing completely. You don't speak. You just step into the shadows together, the air between you charged and hesitant. There's no bed here, no blanket, just the wall, the moonlight, and the low thrum of a generator somewhere in the distance. You press your forehead to theirs. They sigh against your mouth. The kiss is brief, tense, desperate, grateful. Here's your fringe fact. In some military camps, both wartime and peacetime, couples used broom closets, supply rooms, even empty artillery compartments as makeshift hideaways. There's at least one documented account of a couple slipping under a tank during a storm, wrapped in an oil-to-bridge tarp, while guards patrolled just a few meters away. Because love doesn't wait for permission, it adapts. You lean against the cold metal siding of the barracks, hands trembling, not from fear but from adrenaline. They pull you closer, their breath hot against your neck, their fingers moving slowly beneath your waistband like they've memorized your body in a dream and now finally get to test the map. It's not perfect. Your shoulder bumps a pipe. There's a loud crash from inside, a boot falling, someone muttering in their sleep. You both freeze. Wait, listen, then continue. You're not here to be seen, you're here to feel something warm, something voluntary, something not issued by command. There's a scholarly divide over what wartime intimacy really meant. Some argue it was about comfort, survival, soldiers reaching for something human in the midst of chaos. Others say it was defiance, especially in cases where forbidden love, across class, rank, gender, flourished in the hidden corners of barracks and bunkers. Was it real love? Was it circumstantial? You don't know, you don't care. All you know is this moment, this hurried, breathless joining in the shadows, their hand in your hair, your palm pressed against their chest, feeling the staccato of a heartbeat that matches yours. It's not tender exactly, but it's real. Desperate in the way that only wartime makes love feel. Every kiss a confession, every touch a protest against the machinery of violence. Afterward, you help each other straighten uniforms, wipe dust from your sleeves. You whisper goodnight like it's sacred. They slip back into the dark. You return to your cot sliding under the coarse wool blanket. Heart still thudding, muscles still buzzing with memory. You lie still, eyes open, staring at the metal slats above you. Somewhere down the row, someone shifts in their sleep and mumbles a name that's probably not their own. Someone else coughs. The lights buzz softly overhead. You pretend to sleep, but your body remembers everything. Because even here in the barracks, the boot camp, the bomb shelter, people still never find each other. Even when the orders say no, even when the uniforms hide your shape, even when tomorrow might send you to a different front, a different country, a different war. For tonight you are two people, not soldiers, not cogs, not statistics, just two people touching in a sliver of space the world forgot to control. You're lying on your side on a wooden bunk, pretending to be asleep while the air around you hums with quiet tension. The walls are thin, the mattress is thinner. You're in a prison, or a labour camp, or a wartime internment barrack. The lines blur. You don't wear your own clothes anymore. You don't control your schedule. You eat what's given, sleep when told, move when allowed, and the only real choices you have left are internal, what you think, what you remember, and who, if anyone, you let close. The room smells like disinfectant and desperation. Someone is crying softly on the top of a bunk. Another person is pacing just outside the door, their footsteps dragging. Your hands are folded beneath your blanket, fingers aching from cold or maybe from scrubbing floors all day. You've lost track. Time passes strangely here. It flattens. And yet, in this place of surveillance and subtraction, you still feel a flicker of something. A gaze held too long in the mess hall. A soft goodnight from the bunk below. A whispered story traded for a scrap of chocolate. They seem small, inconsequential, but you cling to them like lifelines. Because when you're stripped of everything else, even the smallest kindness feels like a rebellion. Here's your historical fact. In prisons, labour camps, and internment facilities throughout history, gulag camps, Japanese-American internment camps, concentration camps, pew barracks, sexual and romantic relationships persisted. Despite brutal conditions, or perhaps because of them, people still reached for each other, not just for physical comfort, but for the emotional tether that keeps the human mind from drifting too far into despair. You think about them, the person from the laundry shift, the one who lent you gloves when yours were taken. You don't even know their full name, but you know the curve of their mouth when they smirk. You know the way their hand brushed yours under the table once, quickly, like a question. You haven't talked about it. There's no safe space to talk. Only glances, gestures, moments between rules. And here's your fringe fact. In the Theresienstadt ghetto during World War II, couples secretly married under threat of punishment. In Soviet prison camps, forbidden relationships bloomed through letters smuggled across barracks. In some cases, love affairs led to extra rations, or secret meetings in the infirmary, or the simple act of remembering someone else's name when everyone else was trying to forget yours. But was it love? Scholars disagree. Some say these connections were transactional, born out of necessity and fear. Others argue that in the worst places, love becomes even more real, because it's chosen in a world where nothing else is, A moment of closeness becomes the only proof that you're still you, and not just another number stitched onto a uniform. Tonight, you hear the soft shuffle of feet beside your bunk, a cough like a signal, then a whisper, your name. You shift slightly. The curtain, if you're lucky enough to have one, is drawn just enough for a shadow to pass through. They sit beside you, their hip pressed lightly against yours. You don't look at each other. You don't need to. This has happened before. Your hands meet beneath the blanket, fingers laced. No kiss. That would be dangerous. No movement that might shake the bunk and draw attention. Just warmth, connection. Proof that your body still feels, and that someone else is willing to feel it back. They lean close, their breath soft against your neck. They whisper something. Nonsense. Probably a story about a real bed, about bread with crusts, about lying in the sun. You nod, eyes closed. You imagine it with them. Just for a minute, you're somewhere else. Then the footsteps, the sharp rap on the door. You both pull apart like frightened animals, retreating to opposite sides of the cot, adjusting your blankets, breathing too fast. A guard looks in, doesn't see anything, says nothing, moves on, but the moment has already shattered. They squeeze your hand once more, quickly, before slipping out the way they came. You remain still. The room is quiet again, except now your body aches in a different way, longing pressed so tight against survival that it almost hurts. And that's the paradox, isn't it? In the places designed to break you, love becomes sharper, more dangerous, and sometimes more honest. Not draped in romance or comfort, but raw, spare, and necessary. You think about them long after they've gone. You hear them in the sound of boots on the floor. You see them in the corner of your dreams. You don't know how long you'll be here. You don't know if either of you will make it out. But you do know that tonight, someone held your hand. Someone chose you. And in this place of punishment and erasure, that choice is its own kind of freedom. You're sitting alone on a grey couch in your apartment, scrolling through a screen that never seems to run out of people. Smiling faces, shirtless selfies, someone holding a puppy and trying too hard to seem casual. It's quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that eerie, overstimulated way that modern life gets when all the tabs are open but your thoughts won't load. You're home, you're safe, you're even technically alone. And yet, in the deepest irony of your very online, hyper-connected life, you can't seem to find an actual private moment. Your apartment is an open plan. No walls between the kitchen and the bedroom, just a few tasteful rugs to suggest different zones. You share a building with 30 other people. Thin drywall, echoes in the hallway, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbour's blender, phone calls, and very awkward dates. You've lived here for 2 years and have never once spoken more than 10 words to the guy across the hall. But you know he sings along to sad indie songs at 2 a.m. in us. And honestly, that's more intimate than half the conversations you've had lately. Here's your historical fact. In the 21st century, particularly in post-pandemic urban life, architecture and technology have collided to create what some sociologists call public privacy, open-plan living spaces. Glass buildings, smart devices, and always-on connectivity mean people are constantly seen even when they think they aren't. We live with surveillance cameras, wearable tech, smart speakers, and GPS pings. The private sphere has shrunk, not by force but by slow, addictive convenience, which means intimacy has changed too. You don't sneak into the woods or huddle behind curtains anymore. You schedule, you send emojis, you text you up, and wait for the 3 dots to dance. Your partner lives 20 minutes away. Or maybe just across the room, headphones on, completely absorbed in their own digital universe. Either way, connection feels like it requires a password. Tonight they come over. You cook together in the kitchen, barefoot, drinking wine from chipped mugs, playing a playlist that Spotify swears is intimate dinner vibes. You both laugh when it cues up Marvin Gaye. The pasta boils over. Someone knocks on the ceiling. You ignore it. The food is fine. The company is better. After dinner you move to the couch. You curl up next to each other, legs tangled, but both of you keep your phones nearby, just in case. You try to resist the urge to check them. You fail once or twice, but eventually you both put them down. Here's your fringe fact. Modern smart homes, filled with cameras, motion sensors and listening devices like Alexa or Siri, have created new challenges for privacy in the bedroom. In some cases, intimate moments have been accidentally recorded, data collected, voices transcribed. A surprising number of people have begun covering camera lenses with tape and unplugging devices before sex, not because they're paranoid, but because they know someone could be watching. So tonight, You take your partner by the hand and lead them to the bedroom. Not a chamber or a shared cot or a hayloft, but still, strangely, not much more private. There's no lock. The windows face the building across the street. You hesitate, you draw the blinds, you unplug the speaker, you check your phone to make sure it isn't listening. You both laugh nervously at how normal this routine has become. You kiss them, slow, familiar. There's no urgency, just the kind of quiet that only comes when two people know each other's rhythms. Clothes come off, not ripped away, but folded, still bearing the day's wrinkles and sweat. You touch, not just out of habit, but as a reminder. We are still here. You breathe each other in. Your bodies remember what to do, even if your brains are stuck on work emails and side-eye from the neighbour in the hallway. And when you make love, it's not fireworks or whispered poetry. It's something softer, real. The culmination of a dozen texts, 3 missed calls, an overcooked meal, and a mutual agreement to finally look at each other. You're not sneaking this moment. You're not hiding. But you're still fighting for it. In a world that doesn't make space for stance. Much lesser softness. Afterward, you lie together in the dark. The fan hums. The city whines outside. Your phones glow faintly on the nightstand. You don't reach for them. Not yet. You just rest. Skin on skin. Breathing matched. A rare kind of stillness that feels strangely like rebellion. Here's where the historians haven't caught up yet. They're still trying to figure out what this era of connected loneliness will mean for how we love. Some say we're more isolated than ever, trading real intimacy for likes and swipe fatigue. Others argue we've evolved using tech to maintain connection across continents, genders, and time zones. But the truth, it's too early to tell. You roll over. Your partner pulls you close. You both fall asleep to the sound of traffic and the low hum of the refrigerator. Not medieval discomfort. Not royal surveillance. Not communal overexposure. Just modern noise. And still, somehow you've carved out privacy. Not in space, but in choice. You chose to turn toward each other. You chose to connect. And even if the whole world has a lens pointed your way, that moment was just yours. That's how love looks now. Still messy, still imperfect, but stubborn enough to survive even in the age of open concept everything. So now that you've journeyed through 25 slices of human intimacy, some awkward, some tragic, some barely permitted to breathe, it's worth stepping back and letting it all settle in. You've huddled in smoke-filled caves under mammoth skins. You've fumbled in laundry rooms during the Industrial Revolution. You've whispered under yurt blankets and royal silk canopies. You've navigated coded language, shared bunks with strangers, and touched fingertips in prison shadows. And you made it to the modern age, where you have walls, doors, locks, earbuds, and a calendar full of available time slots, and somehow the need for privacy still hums beneath it all. You've seen how sex has never really been just about sex. It's been a method of communication, survival, rebellion, politics, ritual, escape, even to boredom. And every time, no matter the culture or the century, people still found a way to reach for each other. Even when eyes were watching, even when the walls were thin, even when the rules said no. And yes, maybe you picked up on it, privacy in this whole story is kind of an illusion. A luxury when it's there, a myth when it's not. But intimacy, that's real. It doesn't need 4 walls and a do not disturb sign. It just needs willingness, a touch, a glance, a moment when two people decide, this is ours, even if the whole world is peeking through the keyhole. So if tonight you're lying in your bed in your room, with your own door closed and the fan humming gently, appreciate it. You're living a kind of intimacy that most of human history never had the space to imagine. But at the same time, you're part of something timeless, something ancient, something absolutely universal. Because for as long as people have existed, they've found each other in the dark, even when the dark wasn't very dark and someone's in-laws were sleeping 5 feet away. Now close your eyes, let your breath slow, let your body sink deeper into the mattress. You're safe, you're warm. And if someone loves you, let yourself feel that love tonight, even if it's miles away. Even if it's memory, even if it's you choosing to love yourself in a quiet moment of stillness. Sweet dreams, wild thing. You've made it through history's most uncomfortable sleepovers.